Zaire finds himself thrust into the chaotic universe of American comics, where living a peaceful life seems impossible. Earth is engulfed in endless battles and crises, and even if Zaire manages to avoid them, the looming threat of Thanos collecting the Infinity Stones persists. Unwilling to gamble with his fate, Zaire's luck changes when he acquires a life simulator from Warhammer 40K. Now, with bolt guns, dreadnoughts, and Thunderhawk gunships at his disposal, he's ready to take on the universe. Armed with poison blade tanks and even the potential to wield Emperor-class titans, Zaire's bravery knows no bounds. Empowered by the psychic strength of the Emperor and divine blessings, Zaire faces every danger with a confident smile, declaring, "The Astartes have agreed to let you run 100 meters first." In the grim darkness of the far future, there is only war. There is only the Emperor, and he is our shield and protector. It is better to die for the Emperor than to live for yourself. What's up, ladies and gentlemen? Omni-sensei here with What If I Was Reborn in Marvel with Warhammer, 40K Simulator. Part 1. If you enjoy this type of content, please slice the like button. Subscribe to the channel if you haven't already done so. Remember to check out the original story linked in the description. Without further ado, let's get into the legend of the Emperor of Mankind.
The Solar System, Earth, North America, United States, New York City. At 9 in the morning, on the sofa of an old apartment, Zaire sat with a solemn expression. His true identity was that of a transmigrant, a stranger in this world. If it weren't for the news on TV about Stark Industries shutting down its weapons division, Zaire would have thought he had arrived in a parallel universe. Zaire was just a movie enthusiast and a casual comic reader. To him, the well-known characters and plot lines of superhero movies were a blurry memory. He struggled to recall, only remembering a few key points from the storylines. The Battle of New York with thousands of casualties. The rise and fall of Ultron with unknown casualties. And the Endgame where Thanos snapped away half the universe's population. As these thoughts swirled, Zaire couldn't help but shiver. Watching superhero movies was entertainment, but experiencing them firsthand was a different matter entirely. To make things worse, Zaire had merged with the memories of an ordinary teenager named Zaire, who was an orphan with no money, no power, and no superpowers. Now, he was living with his aunt, his legal guardian, helping out in her restaurant during his spare time and saving up tips to pay for college. Zaire had thought about running away. With his aunt's credit card maxed out and his saved-up tuition money, maybe he could even meet the Ancient One at Camartage and become a sorcerer's apprentice. Even if his identity as a transmigrant was discovered, and he was taken in by S.H.I.E.L.D., it was better than becoming a statistic in the Battle of New York. However, the memories of his aunt, who had taken care of him since he was a child, created an unbreakable bond. The emotional connection was too strong to sever, and the stubbornness of his aunt's middle-aged mindset made it impossible for Zaire to change their lives abruptly. So, Zaire had used part of his tuition money to rent the basement of the old apartment. He borrowed tools from neighbors, reinforced the basement with steel and wood, and stocked up on food and water. He hoped that when the Battle of New York happened, he and his aunt would be at home and safe. As the clock struck 9:30, Zaire got up to start his daily routine. In the morning, he had his final year of high school classes. In the afternoon, he helped his aunt run the restaurant. In the evening, he continued to reinforce the basement. The borrowed tools needed to be returned soon, so time was tight. Just then, a string of garbled letters flashed before Zaire's eyes, like a hallucination. Warhammer 40K. Life simulator booting up. Would you like to start the initial simulation? Warhammer 40K? Isn't that a futuristic sci-fi IP built around a tabletop wargame, supplemented by novels, comics, games, and animations? Zaire frowned, puzzled. In his previous life, he was just a casual Warhammer fan, mainly learning about it through videos on paid tubes, especially the series of Warhammer stories made by the uploader Colonel Dachi. After getting hooked, He occasionally read detailed articles on famous battles and the background stories of certain characters. He knew the basic storylines and the major factions in the Warhammer universe, but he couldn't recount specific battles on certain planets or identify the masterminds behind specific events. However, why would his golden finger, as a transmigrant, be linked to the Warhammer universe? That was a dark, ignorant, and desperate universe filled with chaos, a decaying empire, and predatory alien civilizations. Any glimmer of hope was just a tiny spark delaying the inevitable destruction of the universe. Given a choice, only a masochistic lunatic would choose the Warhammer universe. Even then, they would cry like a squished fairy upon arrival. At this moment, Zaire was utterly confused. But this didn't stop him from being deeply worried about his safety. To survive better, he had to gamble on his golden finger. Simulation starting. You have arrived in the Warhammer universe. Time: unknown. Location: Milky Way galaxy, sector unknown. As soon as you step on the planet's surface, the warp trembles. The gaze of the Chaos Gods falls upon you. You clutch your head and wail. Your mind is flooded with XXXXXX. Censored. Dot. Your skull explodes. You died. Simulation ended. Duration: 15 seconds. No options retained from this simulation. As the simulation lasted less than 24 hours, no simulator wear and tear are incurred. What died? Zaire blinked, bewildered. He hadn't yet recovered from the fleeting experience of death. Even in the Warhammer 40k universe, the difficulty of survival was too high. The Chaos Gods. Staring at the simulator's text, Zaire suddenly understood everything. I know too much about the warp. The Chaos Gods, also known as the Ruinous Powers, were born from the negative emotions of countless sentient beings during the war between the Necrons and the Old Ones. From that point on, chaos was eternal and the four gods were immortal. The more chaotic the Warhammer universe, the stronger the Chaos Gods became. And the stronger the Chaos Gods became, the more chaotic the Warhammer universe grew. For 40,000 years, there was no hope, only war. Can I block out my memories? Zaire tentatively asked the simulator. Unfortunately, the simulator was just a tool, not an omnipotent system. I refuse to believe this. Zaire's stubborn side kicked in. He decided to skip school and sat back on the sofa. Simulation starting. You have arrived in the Warhammer universe. Time: unknown. Location: Milky Way galaxy, sector unknown. As soon as you step on the planet's surface, you start praying desperately to the Emperor. The warp trembles again. The gaze of the Chaos Gods falls upon you once more. Your prayers to the Emperor seem to have no effect. You clutch your head and wail. On the brink of death, you seem to see a cold sun shining upon your soul. Your skull explodes. You died. Simulation complete in 1 minute. Selectable options from this simulation are as follows. 1. Emperor's gaze, human affinity. 2. None. 3. None. Since the simulation lasted less than 24 hours, the simulator has no damage. The second simulation ended swiftly, like a fleeting meteor. Well, at least I survived a few more seconds this time. Zaire felt a burning desire to vent his frustrations. His gaze fell upon the sole reward available in the simulator. Emperor's gaze, human affinity. You will be blessed by the Emperor, increasing your favor with most humans while reducing favor with chaos and alien entities. Zaire blinked and selected the reward. His prayer to the Emperor had been a bold attempt, and surprisingly, it drew the Emperor's attention. The Emperor, the founder of the human empire in the Warhammer universe, is revered by his followers as the God Emperor, the master of mankind, the Omniscia, and cursed by his enemies as the Corpse Emperor, the False Emperor, the Sorcerous Corpse. The Emperor does not love any individual human. He loves humanity as a whole. Hope the next simulation won't attract the Chaos Gods again. Emperor's protection. Zaire swallowed hard. The thought of his skull shattering left a deep scar on his psyche. At this moment, Zaire seemed to forget his real-world troubles. Like a teenager addicted to online games, he eagerly began the next simulation. Simulation starting. You have arrived in the Warhammer universe. Time, unknown. Location, Katakan system, Katakan planet. You step onto the planet's surface and are delighted to find a small human outpost nearby. Before you can rejoice, you are surrounded by countless deadly plants and animals. You miraculously survive and are rescued by a Katakan human on a hunting expedition. You express your loyalty to the Emperor, and you are temporarily spared. You discover that the small outpost is manned by a single Katakan human, a new recruit undergoing advanced survival training. You attempt to learn combat and survival skills from him. Although he is taciturn, you notice a hint of approval in his eyes. In the first week, you endure extreme physical training with the Katakan recruit, often urinating blood and collapsing in exhaustion. In the second week, the recruit educates you about the deadly flora and fauna of Katakan. Any failure to remember details results in brutal combat training. You lose a few teeth and feel utterly miserable. In the third week, you undergo basic firearms training with the recruit. Your shooting skills earn his recognition. To your surprise, the injuries from the previous week's extreme training have healed. You attribute this to the recruit's treasured Ant Cow canteen, but he remains silent and contemplative. In the fourth week, you request the recruit to take you on a real survival mission, but he refuses. Stubbornly interpreting this as contempt, you venture into the jungle alone to prove your mettle. You cleverly avoid brainleaf parasites under the approving watch of the hidden recruit. You nimbly dodge the hunting range of barbed grass, with the recruit nodding in approval from a concealed position above. You bravely confront a Katakan trapper, while the recruit intercepts 3 face-eaters lurking by a fetid pond, shaking his head in dismay. You evade the trapper's attack but fail to notice the approaching heretic mosquitoes. Bitten several times, their venom begins to rot your organs. You are near death. In your final moments, you glimpse the recruit's figure and hear his parting blessing as a Katakan long fong pierces your heart, ending your agony. "Emperor protect you, my friend," whispers the solemn recruit, Sly Marbo, in his final eulogy. You are dead. Simulation complete in 27 days. Selectable options from this simulation are as follows. 1. Katakan's Deadly Flora and Fauna Guide. 2. Katakan Longfong Melee Weapon. 3. 1 month of Katakan recruit training. Since the simulation lasted more than 24 hours, the simulator is undamaged. Cooldown time, 27 hours. Provide resources to reduce cooldown time, none currently available. Zaire felt puzzled by his reckless actions within the simulator, but he had no choice but to accept them. He carefully considered the rewards listed by the simulator. From a practical perspective, the first reward was useless. Katakan's environment was too unique and rarely encountered even within the Warhammer universe. The second reward, a Katakan Longfong, was also impractical for Zaire at this time, serving only as a keepsake. Regrettably, Zaire chose the third reward, 1 month of Katakan recruit training. Instantly, Zaire's muscles swelled significantly, tightening his previously loose clothes. An array of combat techniques, including stealth assassinations and ambush traps, ingrained themselves in his memory as if they were innate instincts. Katakan recruit training is extraordinary. Feeling a surge of battle knowledge, Zaire rolled up his sleeve to admire the rippling muscles on his arm, feeling a deep sense of joy. Since his arrival in this world, Zaire had always felt insecure, but now confidence surged within him. As long as he continued simulating, he believed he could face any future crisis. However, the Warhammer simulator required time to cool down. To avoid waiting, resources could be used to reduce the cooldown time. Unfortunately, Zaire still didn't know what kind of resources the simulator needed. He could only wait to find out. At that moment, basking in his newfound strength on the couch, Zaire suddenly remembered something. Glancing at the clock, he realized several hours had passed. It was already 12:20. He had not only skipped his morning classes, but was also close to missing his afternoon job. If I don't leave now, my aunt will be furious. Zaire leaped up from the couch, quickly grabbing his phone and keys before rushing out of the apartment. Zaire pedaled his bike swiftly through the streets. The explosive news about Stark Industries was still making waves on TV and the internet. Even the TV displays in store windows and the electronic billboards were continuously broadcasting the news. Tony Stark was the main topic on every passerby's phone screen. But none of this mattered to Zaire. He navigated through a few familiar streets and arrived at a small restaurant named Delicious. The restaurant was small but well-kept, thanks to his aunt's years of dedicated management. Despite its size, the name Delicious was known all over Manhattan, a testament to his aunt's hard work. Zaire entered the restaurant, walked through the neatly arranged tables, and approached the counter. Even though lunch hours had passed, a few cowboys in the corner were still enjoying their meals. His aunt's exquisite culinary skills were a major draw for the locals, whose usual diet was monotonous and bland. "Good morning, Auntie." Zaire quickly approached and leaned over the counter. At that moment, his aunt was busy with the calculator, organizing the accounts. Without looking up, she responded, "It's 1 p.m., Zaire. You're late again." His aunt, around 35 years old, sported short hair and always wore a white chef's outfit. Her slightly rounded chin enhanced her clean and efficient appearance. Stopping her calculations, she rolled her eyes at the smiling Zaire. "Our helper, Mike, took a long leave, at least a week." He pointed to the takeout boxes nearby. "So, I plan to pause takeout orders after you deliver these." Big Mouth Mike. A clear image of a skinny yet voracious young man formed in Zaire's mind. Wasn't he always talking about working extra to learn cooking? Why the sudden leave? A few days ago, Mike's 7-year-old brother went missing. His aunt sighed, with a hint of sarcasm in her eyes. "You know how useless the police in poor neighborhoods are. They only serve the rich like Tony Stark. Mike has to rely on family and friends to help search. If I get time, I'll contact Mike and offer help," Zaire said seriously, then picked up the helmet on the counter. "Auntie, I'll deliver these meals now. Otherwise, I'll get more bad reviews." Effortlessly lifting the heavy takeout box with one hand, he headed out. "You little rascal." His aunt watched Zaire's broad and strong back with a pleased smile but blinked in confusion. Is he in a growth spurt or secretly working out? He looks much different than before. After years of his aunt's hard work, Delicious focused on serving the middle and lower-income populace, ensuring good quality at reasonable prices. The takeout range usually didn't exceed 5 kilometers. Within 20 minutes, Zaire delivered most of the orders to regular customers who couldn't forget his aunt's cooking. Now, he had only one double meal left. Riding his bike through several crowded streets, Zaire arrived at a recently renovated apartment building. He approached the door and found it locked, accessible only to residents. So he pressed the call button. "Is this Mr. Eugene? Your takeout is here. Could you please come down to get it?" Zaire asked professionally. "Damn it. 403. Bring it up," slurred a man's voice through the intercom. Soon, the apartment door opened with a pleasant chime. "You could have just opened the door in the first place," Zaire sighed, guessing from experience that this customer was likely drunk. With no choice in his customers, Zaire shrugged and carried the takeout box into the building. "Knock, knock, knock." Before long, Zaire knocked on the door of apartment 403. After some footsteps, the door swung open, and a wave of alcohol and weed stench hit him, making him wrinkle his nose despite his usual composure. "Your takeout, sir," Zaire said with a polite smile, handing over the food. "Ugh, thanks." A bleary-eyed blonde man took the takeout and started to close the door. Wham! Zaire's hand shot out, stopping the door. "Sir, the takeout is cash on delivery. You haven't paid yet," he explained with a smile. The blond man blinked in confusion, trying to clear his head, then turned and shouted into the apartment, "Hey, Eugene! Pay for the food. Pay? Pay for what? I need to pay for takeout?" Soon, a large, staggering figure appeared, shoving the blonde aside. With bloodshot eyes and a threatening expression, the man growled at Zaire, "Hey, kid, you better leave." Zaire squinted slightly, calmly pulling out his phone and showing it to the bald man. "Eugene Paul, if you refuse to pay, I will call the police." "How do you know my name?" Eugene's eyes widened. "Who sent you?" Clearly under the influence of alcohol and weed, Eugene's mind was a mess. "Kid, you look familiar." Eugene scrutinized Zaire closely, his expression suspicious. Zaire. Eugene Paul, a former school bully from Zaire's high school, was expelled long ago. A double meal costs $50, plus 10 for delivery, Zaire stated plainly. The total is $60. "Thank you. Your takeout was late." Eugene's face twisted, suddenly looking even more menacing. "I waited over an hour." "Eugene," Zaire sighed, looking sincerely at the man. "It's just a takeout. If you're struggling, I can treat you. But you're clearly just looking for trouble, aren't you?" Zaire squinted, tilting his neck slightly, his hand hanging loosely, fingers twitching subtly. This was the starting stance of Katakan combat techniques, hidden but deadly. "I'm not paying, so what can you do? Call the cops, shorty?" Eugene sneered, his muscles tensing, ready for action. He hadn't changed at all from the bully he used to be. A minute ago, realizing the delivery man was a former classmate, Eugene, emboldened by booze, decided Zaire wouldn't leave unscathed. He hated the school and despised those goody-two-shoes students. Now, standing before him was a perfect human punching bag. To others, this seemed like a one-sided conflict. Zaire, standing at 1.75 meters tall and with a lean build, looked significantly smaller than the burly Eugene. Eugene, a former school bully, had years of street fighting experience, far surpassing that of a typical high school student. The blond man tried to stop Eugene, fearing he would hurt Zaire and cause even more trouble. "Stop it, Eugene." But Eugene, like a raging bull, ignored his friend's plea. He had only one thought in mind, to make the student in front of him cry in pain. He wanted to see fear, enjoy the power of his fists, and instill terror. However, Zaire remained calm and unafraid, even in the face of Eugene's bloodshot eyes. Fear was just another part of the Katakan morning routine. "Cry, kid." Eugene suddenly raised his arm, aiming a heavy punch at Zaire's face. But Zaire's hand had already slipped past Eugene's line of sight. His hard knuckles struck Eugene's ribs. Katakan combat technique. First strike. Ugh! Eugene's menacing grin froze instantly. He opened his mouth wide, a scream of pain building in his chest, ready to burst out. But Zaire showed no mercy, giving Eugene no chance to cry out.
Katakan combat technique, second strike.
The delivery box fell as Zaire's other hand moved like a scythe, striking the side of Eugene's neck. In just 2 moves, Eugene's eyes rolled back, and he collapsed like a ragdoll. Thud! The wooden floor echoed with the fall, and the blond man was left gaping in shock. Everything happened too fast. The tables had turned in an instant, shattering the blond man's limited imagination. The seemingly ordinary high school student had swiftly taken down the battle-hardened Eugene. Even against adult attackers, Eugene's size would usually let him hold his ground for a long time. Fear washed over the blond man as he stared at Zaire, his voice trembling. "Please, don't hurt me. You can take my phone and wallet. $60, please." Zaire sighed, trying to remain patient. "Money. I'll get it right away." The blond man, snapping out of his stupor, frantically searched his pockets for cash. After a few moments, he produced $60, his hands shaking as he handed it over. "Thank you." Zaire took the money, forcing a smile. He hesitated before saying, "Eugene's not dead, but he'll need a few days to recover." "Ah?" The blond man blinked in surprise, then bowed deeply. Thank you." Zaire shrugged, picked up the fallen delivery box, and headed for the elevator. He had plenty of work waiting for him back at the restaurant. Phew! As the elevator descended, Zaire let out a small sigh of relief, his eyes still gleaming with excitement. His first real fight, and he had won so easily. Of course, if he had used the Katakanfong earlier, his first strike would have pierced Eugene's heart. But their minor conflict didn't warrant such brutality. Zaire stepped out of the apartment building, the breeze cooling his heated thoughts. He considered the aftermath of the fight. Self-defense against a known troublemaker would likely be seen as justified, even by the police. Eugene, underage and drunk, causing trouble while using drugs, would face far worse consequences. Confident, Zaire smiled slightly, his movements more fluid as he pedaled his bike back to the restaurant. 10 minutes later, he arrived and quickly resumed his work preparing ingredients. As the evening wore on, more and more customers filled the restaurant, perhaps drawn by the approaching weekend. People rewarded themselves with a hearty dinner after a long week, making Zaire and his aunt busier but also happier. By 6 o'clock, the delicious restaurant was bustling. Different people of all origin, chatting, eating, laughing, and cursing, blended with the neon glow of city at night, showcasing the vibrant pulse of life. Stealing a moment to breathe, Zaire wiped his sweat and took in the lively atmosphere. He appreciated this organized chaos, where food brought together people of all professions and backgrounds, erasing societal divisions, leaving only the joy of good food and new friendships. "Zaire, orders up." His aunt's voice pulled him from his reverie. He quickly got back to work. Table 38. General Tso's chicken. For one. The busy scene continued until 9 in the evening. After the last customer left, Zaire and his aunt finally sat down to eat. After finishing his meal, Zaire, under his aunt's direction, packed up leftover food in takeout boxes to share with the homeless waiting outside the restaurant. This was a tradition his aunt had upheld for years, ensuring no one went hungry if the delicious restaurant was open. After closing up, Zaire biked his aunt home. By 10, Zaire, freshly showered, lay on his bed, lost in thought. The sound of the calculator resetting in the living room echoed softly. His aunt was still tallying the day's earnings. Unable to sleep, Zaire opened his Warhammer simulator. Cooldown time, 17 hours. Please provide resources to reduce the cooldown time. Currently no resources available. Frowning, Zaire grabbed his phone and held it up to the simulator. Current resources do not match. Please provide resources to reduce the cooldown time. Determined, Zaire tried a series of random items, tissue paper, a keychain, and even his bedsheet. But the simulator refused them all. What kind of resources do you need? At least give me a hint. Frustrated, Zaire fell into deep thought. Then an idea struck him. With a serious expression, he bit his finger, squeezed out a few drops of blood, and offered it to the simulator. Current resources do not match. Please provide resources to reduce the cooldown time. Forget it. I'll just sleep. Muttering curses, Zaire turned over, sucking his finger, and closed his eyes. In the basement of the apartment building, the loud clamor of power drills and other tools reverberated continuously. Despite it being the weekend, Zaire chose to wake up early to continue the final touches on his safe house. Periodically, he paused his work to check the simulator's interface, keeping an eye on the cooldown timer. Time passed, and as he finished tidying up the safe house, the simulator's cooldown finally ended. Zaire eagerly rubbed his hands together and started a new simulation. Simulation starting. Current identity. Katakan new recruit. Would you like to enter the simulation with this identity? If refused, the simulator will choose a random identity. The Simulator now had a new mode? Zaire licked his lips and blinked. After a moment of consideration, he decided to proceed with the new recruit identity. You have entered the Warhammer universe. Time: 762 M41. Location: unknown. You have become a Catacan new recruit, eager to serve the Emperor. You are temporarily conscripted by the Imperium and become part of a Catacan regiment. Upon landing on the planet, the keen Colonel Iron Eye takes notice of your potential. Assigned to a veteran patrol squad, you and 4 seasoned Catacan soldiers are tasked with recon and strike missions. You are given basic equipment: a las gun and 4 fragmentation grenades. You seek advice on battlefield survival from the veterans, who initially scoff but eventually impart crucial knowledge, helping you integrate into the team. Day 1. Under the guidance of the veterans, you conduct your first patrol, gradually familiarizing yourself with the planet's terrain. This is a desolate, deadly world with poor visibility. Identifying friend from foe is difficult until they're close. Danger lurks around every corner. Day 2. Following orders from Colonel Iron Eye, your team heads to an unknown location to gather intel for an impending offensive. You are authorized to carry additional weapons. Remembering the veterans' teachings, you choose only a las gun, 10 fragmentation grenades, and a traditional Catacan red bandana. The veterans commend your choices as you continue adapting to the harsh environment. Day 3. Venturing into unfamiliar territory, your squad moves cautiously, avoiding detection by unknown enemies. The night passes without incident. Day 4. You encounter an alien scout party, a group of green-skinned orcs in battered blue armor wielding crude firearms. The veterans, accustomed to such encounters, launch a preemptive strike, killing all the orcs. You survive, unscathed, and help the veterans gather intel from the battlefield. A knowledgeable veteran identifies the orcs as part of the Death Skull clan, known for their cunning and knack for salvaging and creating war machines. For your recon team, this discovery is concerning. It means the orcs on this planet likely possess formidable heavy weaponry. Day 5. Your squad faces increasing orc attacks. These orcs have better crafted blue armor and more powerful weapons. A brave veteran is overwhelmed and killed by the orcs. Amid the chaos, an orc boy bites off one of your arms, but you crush its skull with a grenade, enduring excruciating pain. You lose a lot of blood and feel weak. Day 6. As your squad penetrates deeper into the orc-controlled zone, more orcs attack, attempting to stop your progress. Another veteran sacrifices himself to cover the retreat, securing a path for the remaining team. Despite multiple fierce battles, your condition stabilizes. The surviving veterans attribute your recovery to the Emperor's blessing, and you agree. Day 7. Your squad discovers a Death Skull Mega Gargant factory in a place called Widow's Valley. This mobile fortress and war machine factory is a significant threat. You and the veterans agree that the orcs must be stopped before they grow stronger. Sending out a distress signal with coordinates, you launch a desperate, suicidal assault to destroy the factory. Overwhelmed by the green tide, another veteran falls. The mission fails and the task is aborted. You choose to die alongside the last surviving veteran. Together, you pull the pins on all your grenades and charge into the orc horde, shouting for the Emperor as the explosives detonate. Your body is torn apart in the explosion. You are dead. This simulation ends after 7 days. Simulation rewards are available. 1. 10 fragmentation grenades. 2. Catacan knife. Night Reaper, masterfully crafted. 3. Catacan Veterans Red Bandana New. The simulation time exceeds 24 hours. Simulator wear is not mitigated. Cooldown, 7 hours. Please provide resources to reduce cooldown time. None available currently. Zaire's eyes lit up as he scanned the simulator's reward options. Although it didn't offer the coveted Imperial firearms, A masterfully crafted catachan knife was a valuable prize. He chose the second option. Instantly, a large knife, nearly the length of an adult's forearm, materialized in his hand. The Night Reaper had a longer, narrower blade than the typical catachan fong, with a triangular blade design perfect for inflicting deep, bleeding wounds. The blade was coated with matte black paint to reduce reflections, making it ideal for stealth operations. Zaire admired the knife, a smile never leaving his face.
Ai niga ne.
His familiar ringtone interrupted his thoughts. He instinctively answered the call, but after hearing a few words, fury surged within him. When Zaire arrived hurriedly at the delicious restaurant, he found the scene already swarming with activity. A white police car from the Manhattan precinct was parked by the curb, and a yellow caution tape cordoned off most of the sidewalk. A rotund police officer with a coffee cup in hand stood casually nearby, occasionally shooing away curious onlookers and tourists. A few reporters from minor newspapers crouched in the corners, casting furtive glances at a black police officer on duty. Zaire jumped off his bicycle and ran to the black officer. "Excuse me, officer. I'm a relative of the restaurant owner." "Zaire, right?" The officer smiled warmly and nodded. "Your aunt informed us in advance. You can go in." He continued, "But be careful, kid. The forensic team is on the way to collect evidence, and it'll take some time." "I understand," Zaire said, taking a deep breath. He ducked under the caution tape and entered the restaurant. His arrival caught the attention of the smoking reporters nearby, who turned their heads and spat disdainfully in the direction of the officer. The officer remained indifferent, though his grip tightened on the handle of his gun. Inside the restaurant, Zaire's face grew darker with each passing second. Tables and chairs lay overturned, and broken dishes and cutlery littered the floor. Brass shell casings were scattered everywhere, and the ceiling was riddled with bullet holes, making the place resemble a war zone rather than a dining establishment. Fury welled up within Zaire, but he suppressed it and quickly walked over to his aunt. She sat in her usual chair, her short hair damp with sweat, her eyes vacant and her face pale. Her hands were clasped tightly, her fingers white from the pressure. A middle-aged policeman with a brown beard sat opposite her, seemingly more interested in his watch than in questioning her. Zaire gently called out, "Aunt, are you hurt?" His aunt snapped back to reality, her eyes red-rimmed, and replied in a shaky voice, "Just a little more, and I wouldn't be here to see you." Anger flared in Zaire's eyes, but he took a deep breath and reassured her, "Don't worry, Aunt. I'm here now. Everything will be okay." Once his aunt had calmed down, Zaire turned to the bearded policeman and asked, "Officer, what exactly happened here?" The policeman frowned slightly and replied with irritation, "Just a typical day in Manhattan. A few masked robbers tried to steal from the restaurant. Your aunt tried to stop them, and one of the nervous rookies fired his gun, spraying bullets everywhere. Don't worry, kid. Most robbers here are experienced and only go after money, not people." Zaire's anger turned to bitter laughter. Pointing to the chaotic restaurant, he said, "If this isn't a big deal, then what is? Do the police only consider it serious when someone is hurt or killed? Are our taxes paying for this kind of service? Shouldn't the NYPD refund us for their negligence?" The bearded policeman stood up abruptly, his voice indifferent. "I'm just a regular cop. If you feel your rights are violated, take it up with the mayor. And by the way, catching major criminals is the FBI's job, not ours. If thieves think a place is an easy target, they will return. My advice, close down for a while." With that, he called the black officer and walked out, seemingly unconcerned about preserving the crime scene evidence. Zaire's aunt grabbed his arm before he could shout after them. Exhausted, she said, "I told you, Zaire, poor people can't rely on the police. Only the rich get their attention. Let's just accept our bad luck." Zaire clenched his jaw, forcing a stiff smile. "Okay, Aunt, whatever you say. but internally he vowed never to let this go. After a moment of silence, Zaire gently urged, "Aunt, let's go home and rest." She hesitated, looking around the damaged restaurant. "But we haven't cleaned up, and the losses aren't counted." "Don't worry, I'll handle everything," Zaire promised, patting his chest. Seeing his determination, she relented. The ordeal had been too much for her kind heart to bear. "Take it slow," Zaire said, carefully helping her up and guiding her outside. As they walked out, several reporters suddenly rushed into the restaurant, trampling over the evidence without a second thought, eager for a story. Zaire's long-suppressed anger exploded. He stepped forward, shielding his aunt, and assumed a fighting stance. His eyes burned red with fury, channeling the ferocity of his catachan training. "Get out!" he roared. The reporters froze, exchanged glances, and then scrambled out of the restaurant. His aunt patted his tense back, soothing him. "Let it go, Zaire. Let's just go home." "Okay, Aunt," he said, his voice softening. "Let's go." But his resolve remained unshaken. This wasn't over. Not by a long shot. At 4 in the afternoon, the setting sun bathed New York in a golden glow. Zaire, with a stern expression, stepped out of his apartment, wearing a black baseball cap and carrying a gray shoulder bag. Just a few minutes earlier, his aunt, still shaken, had finally managed to fall asleep. Before drifting off, she had reminded Zaire to clean up the restaurant and post a closed notice. Zaire obediently headed back to the restaurant. However, his shoulder bag now contained a matte black catachan combat knife. Zaire could endure any threat, whether it was the menacing Thanos from distant galaxies or the not-yet-created Ultron intending to destroy humanity. But all of this depended on his aunt not being harmed. Otherwise, it would be a fight to the death. Over the years, Zaire had seen enough to lose faith in the city's upper echelons responsible for maintaining order. Justice and fairness? He believed only in taking matters into his own hands. When Zaire arrived at the restaurant, the forensic team promised by the Manhattan precinct had yet to show up. Perhaps they never intended to come. A robbery that neither caused fatalities nor stirred public outcry would likely become just another file in the precinct's archives, lost to history. Zaire rolled up his sleeves and began cleaning up the debris. Salvageable items were kept minimizing losses, while the irreparable ones were discarded and counted as damages. Not long after, he noticed a figure loitering outside the restaurant. It was a shabby, hunched blonde homeless man. Zaire stopped what he was doing and walked to the door. "Hey, friend, the restaurant's closing for a while. You should go to the church for some food." The scruffy homeless man hesitated, glancing at Zaire with uncertain eyes. Summoning his courage, he stammered, I didn't come for food. I was sleeping on the street when the robbery happened. I saw the robbers. They were all wearing red tracksuits and didn't sound like locals. They seemed Slavic." Zaire's eyes narrowed as he muttered to himself, "Red tracksuits? Slavic? Could it be the Tracksuit Mafia?" The Tracksuit Mafia was a criminal gang operating in New York and its surrounding cities, with most of its core members being Slavic. After a moment of contemplation, Zaire pulled out a roll of cash from his pocket. He took a few $20 bills and shoved them into the homeless man's pocket. "Thank you for the information. This is for you." To Zaire's surprise, the man's face turned red, and he shakily tried to return the money. "I didn't do it for money. You and your aunt are good people. Your food makes me feel alive, like there's still meaning to just being alive." Tears welled up in the homeless man's eyes, and in his agitation, he revealed the inflamed needle marks on his arms. Zaire noticed but didn't take back the money. Sighing, he asked, "What's your name?" "R. Robert Reynolds." The man hesitated before answering. He then accepted the money without further protest. Robert. The name seemed familiar to Zaire, but he quickly dismissed the thought. He had more pressing matters to attend to. Tracksuit Mafia, Slavs, Eugene Paul? Eugene was a typical Slavic name. Zaire chatted with Robert a bit more before sending him on his way. Locking the door behind him, he hopped on his beloved bicycle and headed west. Manhattan apartment, room 403. Eugene Paul lounged dejectedly on his couch, his neck still in a plastic brace for treatment. Despite the doctor's strict instructions to avoid alcohol and smoking to aid his recovery, Eugene was not one to follow orders. Sipping beer and scrolling through his phone, he tried to alleviate both his physical pain and the psychological blow of being bested by a mere delivery boy. This defeat had made him a laughingstock among his peers. His pride was shattered. "Damn bastard," Eugene muttered, throwing his phone aside and closing his eyes to calm his frustration. Suddenly, a knock on the door interrupted his thoughts. Eugene opened his eyes in irritation and yelled, "Who's there?" No response came from outside, just another series of knocks. "Who's there, damn it?" Eugene growled, struggling to get up from the couch. He made his way to the door, one hand supporting his neck. Just as he reached for the handle, the door exploded inward with a loud bang, slamming into Eugene and knocking him to the floor. "Ah!" he screamed, his cry echoing through the apartment. "Hello, Eugene," Zaire said, stepping through the doorway with a smile, his baseball cap casting a shadow over his eyes. "Who?" Eugene gasped, struggling to see through the pain. When he finally recognized Zaire, his eyes widened in terror. No, stay away from me." Zaire approached silently, watching as the once mighty Eugene wriggled on the floor like a worm. Minutes later, Eugene, unable to bear the pain any longer, lay motionless, tears blurring his vision. "Zaire, please spare me. Murder is a capital crime in New York. Please, I was wrong. I shouldn't have bullied others. I shouldn't have hurt people." Zaire squatted in front of Eugene, maintaining his icy gaze. "I ask, you answer. Understand." Eugene, tears streaming down his face, nodded frantically. I understand. Around 3 this afternoon during the robbery, did you fire any shots?" "What?" Eugene blinked in confusion. "Robbery? Shooting?" Zaire's eyes narrowed further. Eugene, sensing the need to convince him, swore, "I swear to God, I never use guns to bully people. And this afternoon, I was at the hospital getting treatment." Zaire frowned. Could he have the wrong person? Zaire subconsciously shifted his gaze. He stared into Eugene's eyes. "Yesterday you got beaten up, and today my restaurant was robbed. Eugene, do you think I would believe this is just a coincidence?" Before he finished speaking, Zaire abruptly stood up. He planted his foot on Eugene's chest. Slowly, he applied his entire body weight. "Ah!" In an instant, Eugene's facial features twisted, his lips turning pale. Sweat beads the size of beans quickly emerged on his forehead. Almost in a pleading tone, he desperately shouted, "Zaire, please believe me. I really don't know anything. Besides occasionally teasing classmates, I haven't done anything illegal." However, Zaire, silent, pulled out a long and massive military knife from his backpack. His movements were slow yet resolute. Zaire bent down with the knife tip aimed at Eugene's eye. Eugene, lying on the ground, could almost feel the chilling edge of the military knife. This made him terrified, unable to move at all. At the same time, a cold countdown emerged from Zaire's clenched teeth. 1. It's Sergei. Under such terrifying mental pressure, Eugene's eyes instantly broke down, and he shouted in despair, "It must be Sergei. It has to be him. His cousin is a gangster. Sergei told me their whole family has gang ties." A faint smile briefly appeared at the corner of Zaire's mouth. His grip on the knife remained unchanged, but the pressure on Eugene's chest had lessened considerably. "I thought Sergei was just boasting. Who doesn't know a few gangster friends? But I never thought he would be involved in a robbery, let alone robbing your restaurant." Eugene's eyes welled up with tears, his words filled with indescribable grievance. Zaire fell into thought, then suddenly asked, "Why do you think it's Sergei?" "I'm not sure. But Sergei didn't come to visit me at the hospital this afternoon." Eugene's expression changed constantly, his tone resentful. "And my embarrassing incident of getting beaten up has spread throughout the entire social circle. Besides Sergei, no one else knew about it. Also, Sergei has always liked tinkering with firearms since he was little, but his skills are terrible. He's too embarrassed to show off. He only mentioned it to me." Sergei, the blonde man encountered while delivering food yesterday. Zaire took a deep breath, briefly pondered, and made a decision. He slowly sheathed the katakana military knife and lifted his foot off Eugene's chest. "His full name?" Zaire asked. "Sergei Petrovich," Eugene blurted out. "Where does he live?" Zaire continued. "Probably somewhere in Brooklyn? I really don't know where exactly because I've never been to his place." Eugene explained desperately. By now, Eugene was terrified, not daring to lie. He really had nothing to do with the robbery. Zaire shifted his gaze, suddenly noticing Eugene's phone lying on the sofa. He picked it up and handed it to Eugene on the floor. "Call Sergei and ask where he is." "Got it." Eugene took the phone, cautiously searched for the number, and dialed. Unfortunately, there was only a series of unanswered beeps from the other end of the phone. Eugene, looking pale, touched his neck. He looked at Zaire, forcing a bitter smile. No one answered. Zaire nodded expressionlessly. This was within his expectations. "Let me borrow it." Zaire took the phone from Eugene's hand and turned to leave. The long night was just beginning. Just as he was about to step out of the room's door, Zaire suddenly stopped, turned back, and said, "Do you know the rules to save your life?" Eugene, still trembling on the ground, hurriedly replied, "I won't call the police. I won't tell anyone. I'll try to be a good person. Thank you for cooperating." Zaire nodded satisfactorily and walked out of the room. After the footsteps in the corridor gradually faded away, Eugene struggled to sit up, occasionally uttering painful groans. Simply an undeserved disaster. In the center of the street, traffic flowed densely, and the piercing honks echoed one after another. As night fell, the dazzling neon lights continued to illuminate pedestrians returning home on the roadside. They also illuminated Zaire's cold and stern face. At this moment, he was checking Eugene's social media accounts, searching for the next target, any trace of Sergei. Ding dong. Just then, a Twitter notification mentioning Eugene caught Zaire's eye. He casually clicked on it, and a photo from Sergei Petrovich slowly loaded. The photo seemed to be taken in a dimly lit bar booth. Facing the camera, Sergei, with his upper body exposed, had an extremely excited expression, his eyes blazing. Next to him, two naked women were provocatively posing. But what caught Zaire's attention was something else in the photo. Sergei tightly clutching a large bundle of cash in his hands. Zaire roughly estimated, just from what was visible in the photo, there were over $2,000 in cash. Could a poor guy who struggles to even pay for food deliveries suddenly become rich overnight? Such miracles might exist in the world, but definitely not for Sergei Petrovich. He was undoubtedly one of the robbers who raided the restaurant during the day. Zaire's eyes narrowed, a sardonic grin forming on his face. "Caught you." Immediately, Zaire pocketed his phone, adjusted the handlebars, and sped off along the street. Brooklyn, Blueberry nightclub. Completely unsuspecting, Sergei was inside, spending wildly and enjoying the night, perhaps to taunt the injured Eugene. Sergei even thoughtfully tagged the nightclub's address in the photo. This significantly reduced Zaire's difficulty in finding him. At this moment, under the cover of night, Zaire dashed through the light columns of the street lamps, heading towards his target. But before that, he needed a few things to kick off this bloody midnight revelry. Zaire searched along the way and quickly found a small supermarket. By the time Zaire finished shopping, He had almost exhausted all the cash on him. A steel pipe, about the thickness of a finger and more than a foot long. A roll of toilet paper and 2 boxes of nails. A military-grade oil crayon and a pair of heavy military boots. Additionally, because the supermarket was hosting a promotional lottery, Zaire unexpectedly won a red men's scarf as a consumer reward. Under the night sky, Zaire stared at the red scarf in his hand, unable to help but reveal a cold, sardonic smile. Brooklyn is home to countless bars and nightclubs, but there is only one that stands out above the rest. Blueberry Nightclub. Here, you will find students looking for a night out and city professionals unwinding after work. Wealthy white men seeking flings and various people selling pleasure all gather here. Whatever you desire, you can find it and satisfy it at Blueberry Nightclub. Of course, these services come at a cost and often a steep one. As midnight approached, a drunken Sergei stumbled out the nightclub's back door, staggering into a dimly lit alley. This escape route was reserved for regular patrons, typically used to avoid enemies or the police. Sergei had just become a basic member of the club, barely qualifying to use it. The manager had only agreed because of Sergei's cousin, but Sergei didn't mind. In fact, he was quite pleased. Tonight, he had achieved something on his own, helping his cousin fulfill a wish and earning a generous reward in the process. I, Sergei, the rising star of New York City's gang scene. Hee. Full of confidence, Sergei couldn't help but giggle, recalling the smooth sensation he had just experienced. The women in Blueberry Nightclub were stunning, both in looks and figure. Unfortunately, the beauties were forbidden from exchanging contact information with clients. They weren't allowed to leave the nightclub unless they were privately invited by higher-level members. So, Sergei planned to contact a familiar technician to see if he could continue his exploits tonight. However, in his drunken haze, Sergei failed to notice the figure emerging from the shadows behind him. A terrifying figure, with a red headscarf and a face painted in black and green camouflage, was silently approaching. It was Zaire, who had been waiting for this moment. Silently, Zaire gave Sergei no chance to resist. With a powerful step, Zaire closed the distance in an instant, his bulging veins emphasizing his strength as he wrapped an arm around Sergei's neck. Ugh! Sergei, taken by surprise, couldn't make a sound. He flailed his arms, trying to escape Zaire's grip, but it was futile. In just a few seconds, Sergei's eyes rolled back as he began to lose consciousness, his body going limp as he neared asphyxiation. Zaire relaxed his arm slightly to prevent Sergei from dying in the alley. This was not the right place or time. Sergei still had information to provide. Then, Zaire swiftly hoisted Sergei's heavy body and vanished into the depths of the empty alley. This location was too close to the nightclub and unsuitable for an interrogation. Zaire had already scouted a perfect spot for a heart-to-heart. Bang! Sergei's body hit the ground like a sack of potatoes, kicking up a cloud of dust. This was an abandoned property, far from the streets, with the nearest neighbors over 200 meters away. Zaire could do whatever he needed without concern. Perhaps due to Zaire's rough handling, the unconscious Sergei began to wake up. Ah! He let out a groan of pain, attempting to roll over, but Zaire stepped on his messy blonde hair, pinning his head to the ground. Sergei Petrov? Zaire asked knowingly. Groggy, Sergei hadn't fully grasped his situation. He struggled to get up, shouting angrily, "Do you know who I am? Do you know who my cousin is?" Zaire responded with a cold laugh. He lifted his other booted foot and brought it down hard. Crack. With a crisp sound, one of Sergei's arms snapped like a dry twig. Ah! Sergei's scream was cut short as Zaire pressed his foot into Sergei's mouth, muffling him. At this moment, Sergei, veins bulging in his neck, writhed like a dying fish, his thin clothes soaked in sweat. After a while, as the struggles weakened, Zaire asked again, his eyes cold. "I'll ask once. Who came up with the idea to rob the delicious restaurant?" As Zaire moved his foot off Sergei's mouth, the now haggard Sergei, no longer defiant, mumbled through bloodied lips. "It was me. I suggested it first. Why? The restaurant's cash wouldn't be that much. You could have gotten more from the grocery store next door. Was it because the restaurant had no risk?" Zaire asked, his face expressionless. Sergei hesitated before quickly deciding to spill everything, driven by the pain from his broken arm. I'll tell everything. We didn't rob just for money. It was for the thrill, the rush of committing a crime. My cousin is a small-time leader in the tracksuit gang. He said the underworld's rules have changed. A month ago, a new king unified all the gangs on the East Coast. Every criminal organization must follow his orders. No independent crimes are allowed. Each gang can only profit from the criminal activities assigned by the underworld king. Bank robbers can only rob banks. Drug dealers can only sell drugs. And if a gang wants to change its business, they must pay a huge crime fee to the king. Damn it! If we can't commit crimes as we please, why join a gang at all? It's a joke. But no one dares to defy the king's orders now. No one thinks it's a joke. Hundreds of lives have forged the new rules, the new order. Sergei swallowed hard, his voice trembling as he continued. So, I just wanted to give my cousin a break, help him relieve some stress, and complete my initiation into the tracksuit gang. After all, my cousin has always looked out for me. Joining his gang isn't so bad, right? Where is your cousin now? Zaire asked, narrowing his eyes. Today's Saturday, so it's finance day for the gang. Sergei, lying defeated on the ground, had given up struggling. I overheard my cousin's call once. Near the Brooklyn Bridge, by the East River, there's a place called Warehouse 10. That's the tracksuit gang's secret hideout. If you're looking for him, he's probably there. Having gotten the address from Sergei, Zaire nodded in satisfaction. He took a step back and bent down. Sergei. Sergei, clinging to a sliver of hope, lifted his head instinctively. Squelch. A massive, pitch-black military knife plunged into Sergei's eye socket. The razor-sharp blade, slick with white fluid, pierced through the back of his blonde head. Thanks for your cooperation. Zaire, his face stern, withdrew the massive machete. He flicked the blade, shedding a mix of red and white. The machete looked as good as new, as expected from a finely crafted Katakan weapon. It didn't take much effort for Zaire to end Sergei's brief life. Zaire wasn't a bloodthirsty person by nature, but to maintain a peaceful and tranquil life. Staining his hands with blood was a necessity, and since this not first time he'd done this. Using the tip of his military boot, Zaire nudged Sergei's corpse. He noticed that in Sergei's hidden hand, a phone with its recording function activated was still running. Clearly, Sergei had not realized his mistake. Zaire bent down to pick up the phone. He also took anything that could identify Sergei, as well as the small amount of cash left in his pockets. Then, after carefully cleaning up any traces left at the scene, he turned and left. Midnight had passed. The earlier clear night sky was now gradually covered by thick clouds. The air was becoming more humid. A heavy rain seemed imminent. By the tidal East River, warehouse number 10 facing the Brooklyn Bridge was hidden among numerous buildings. If one were to investigate on paper, they would find this small warehouse. Owned by an inconspicuous publicly traded company in Manhattan, used for storing idle items. Under layers of disguise, as long as the comings and goings were kept discreet and the personnel's appearances were watched, even the police could be used to guard the warehouse.
Vladimir Vish.
It was through this clever plan that he quickly gained the favor of the gang leader, and became one of the notorious leaders of the tracksuit gang. However, recently, the rapid changes in the underworld had left Vich in a difficult position, no longer as prosperous as before. Do criminals need order? To some extent, yes. The unwritten rules of gangs can help most criminals evade legal punishment. They also prevent conflicts between gangs from escalating and causing economic losses. However, when these unwritten rules are fully realized and become inviolable orders, Vitch was surprised to find his degree of freedom was even less than that of an ordinary New York citizen. But Vitch had no way out. Above, he was meticulously counting stacks of old cash. These were the criminal profits he was about to turn in. Even a single missing bill could result in severe questioning from the gang leaders. So, the dedicated Vitch dared not be careless and always handled it himself. Due to the significant interests involved, to prevent anyone from getting ideas, Vitch hadn't brought much manpower. Only 2 trusted confidants were guarding the warehouse. Buzz, buzz. At that moment, his phone vibrated in his jacket pocket. Vitch blinked a few times to relieve his dry eyes, then pulled out the phone. Ah! He twisted his neck, trying to relax, and after glancing at the message, let out a chuckle. How I missed those wild and simple youthful days. Vitch sighed. The message was from his cousin Sergei. Contained no words, just a racy photo of Sergei celebrating with some naked women. Vitch chuckled and put the phone away. After their first crime, the unspent adrenaline always seeks an outlet in 2 things, women and drugs. Until the criminal methods become routine, the numbed feelings no longer stir any emotion. One day, Sergei would understand this feeling too. Suddenly, Vitch frowned. He instinctively grabbed a submachine gun from the table. Something felt off about the environment, and the warehouse was too quiet. Where was the sound of his confidants smoking and chatting, and their patrolling footsteps? Inwan? Nikolai? Vitch called softly, listening intently. But when he received no response, click, Vitch, expressionless, pulled the bolt of the gun. He agilely leaped off the table, hiding in the angle formed by several crates. The warehouse lights above were warm and bright, but sweat was starting to bead on Vitch's forehead. Even his palms gripping the gun were sweaty, forcing Vitch to repeatedly wipe his palms to prevent the gun from slipping and ruining everything. After a moment of silence, Vitch swallowed and called out into the eerily quiet warehouse. Friend, if Inwan and Nikolai are still alive, please spare them. They are just men trying to make a living with families to support. What do you need? If I can help, I won't refuse. The cash on the table, if you're not afraid of gang retaliation, take it. If it's not enough, there are 10 kilograms of high-purity drugs in the black crate in the corner, worth millions. For a while, only the faint echo answered him. Vitch was sure the intruder wasn't a cop, if not a hitman from a rival gang. Then it had to be those mysterious vigilantes. Thunk, thunk, thunk. Suddenly, a basketball-sized round object was thrown from a narrow aisle in the warehouse. After several bounces, it rolled to Vitch's feet. A single glance made Vitch's face pale. He closed his eyes, a mournful sound escaping through gritted teeth. Inwan. It was a human head, a familiar face bloodied and unrecognizable. Eyes pierced by long, thin nails. At the base of the nails stuck in the eye sockets, several strips of torn toilet paper were wrapped around. At that moment, the blood-soaked toilet paper clung to the face, like a grotesque Halloween mask. Horror mixed with absurdity. Terror brewed into dread. Breathing heavily, Vitch opened his bloodshot eyes wide. He gritted his teeth and shouted, I swear to God, the tracksuit gang will hunt you down forever, and your family will kill everything you care about. Even if your family is just a dog, we'll find it, chop it up, and deliver it to you. You're dead meat.
Bang, bang, bang.
Fueled by rage, Vitch aimed his gun from behind the crates, firing wildly in all directions. Hot shell casings hit Vitch's face, making him flinch. But every time his peripheral vision caught the gruesome head, the mix of sorrow and fury drove him mad again. Click, click. The submachine gun's magazine emptied with a loud click. Vitch panted heavily, trembling fingers reaching for his waist. ready to reload. Whoosh! But at that moment, a nail wrapped in toilet paper silently shot through the gap between two crates. It struck Vitch's hand with pinpoint accuracy. Ah! Vitch screamed, the gun slipping from his sweaty grip. Before he could react, more nails like bullets shot out, piercing Vitch's face, penetrating flesh and bone. The unbearable pain seemed to awaken Vitch's ferocity. He forced his eyes open wide. Ignoring everything, he stretched out his arm, trying to grab the submachine gun that had fallen in front of him. But in his impulsiveness, Vitch overlooked the blind spot in his vision. A shadowy figure perched above the wooden crates suddenly leaped down. In midair, a massive, pitch-black machete was forcefully swung down. Slash! With a faint crack and a sudden, agonizing scream, Vitch's hand, along with half his forearm, was severed from his body, falling into the cold embrace of the concrete floor. Swish! Simultaneously, the long, dark machete, guided by its wielder's wrist, turned again, thrusting into Vitch's chest. In the blink of an eye, Vladimir Vitch was pinned to the wooden crate, lifeless. Who? At that moment, Zaire, wearing a red bandana and face painted with camouflage, finally exhaled in relief. His legs weakened, almost causing him to collapse to the ground. The night raid had nearly drained Zaire's strength, especially when he killed the other two men earlier. His left arm had strained excessively, pulling a muscle. He had also narrowly avoided letting them escape, which could have escalated into a bigger crisis. This was why Zaire used the bloody scene to unsettle Vitch, to increase his psychological pressure. Ultimately, the pressure would lead to fatal mistakes. Otherwise, Zaire wouldn't resort to such brutal methods. He was never a ruthless person. With a complex look in his eyes, Zaire glanced at the dying, blood-vomiting Vitch. He shook his head slightly. Then, Zaire tested his injured left arm and found it manageable. Next, he began rummaging through the surrounding wooden crates. Since he had infiltrated the warehouse, the usually silent simulator had been sending alerts. Resources available nearby. Please collect promptly. 20 minutes later, Zaire completed his initial search. Most of the crates contained luxury goods smuggled to avoid taxes, but 5 of the crates contained brand new firearms. Curious, Zaire picked up a submachine gun reeking of gun oil. Immediately, the simulator interface appeared before his eyes. Hazardous material. Firearm. Reduces cooldown by 1 hour. Absorb hazardous material? Zaire widened his eyes slightly. The simulator needed firearms? It had been over 10 hours since Zaire's last simulation. The cooldown had ended, and he could start a new simulation at any time. Zaire chose to absorb, wanting to see what changes the simulator would undergo. Current cooldown reduction. 1 hour. 1 gun equals 1 hour. Zaire's eyes lit up, and without hesitation, he quickly absorbed all the firearms in the warehouse, even those from the dead men. Current cooldown reduction. 6 days and 5 hours. 149 hours. Staring at the final number on the simulator, Zaire couldn't help but smile. Based on the ratio of 1 hour of cooldown per day survived, 149 hours would allow for 149 days of simulation, nearly half a year, enough to significantly enhance Zaire's combat and survival abilities. But most importantly, there might be a shortage of many resources in America, but firearms were definitely not one of them. Right? I wonder if drugs count as hazardous materials? With a bright future ahead, Zaire suddenly remembered Vitch's words. The warehouse still held 10 kilograms of white powder, waiting for Zaire to find. But he didn't know if the simulator required such things. Driven by motivation, Zaire seemed to forget his minor injuries. He searched and found a black crate in the corner. However, upon prying it open, he discovered it was empty. Why did I naively believe a gang leader? Zaire couldn't help but mock himself. But just as he was about to turn around, he heard a faint noise. Thud, thud, thud. Squinting, Zaire suddenly lifted his leg, mustered his strength, and kicked the black crate beside him. Boom! The crate toppled over, revealing a hidden trapdoor to a basement. Zaire's expression turned serious as he listened intently. Thud, thud, thud. Sure enough, faint knocking sounds were coming from the basement. Hostages? Animal smuggling? Zaire couldn't determine immediately and decided to open it and see. He took a deep breath and gripped the handle on the trapdoor tightly with his right hand. Clang, clang, accompanied by the metallic creak of hinges. A suffocating stench of waste wafted up. However, when the warehouse lights shone into the basement, Zaire's eyes widened in an instant. He stood still, staring at the scene below in silence. It was full of children. Children of various skin colors. Children around 7 or 8 years old, with blank expressions. Most of them wore tattered clothes, with prominent tear streaks on their small faces. The opening of the trapdoor and the sudden light seemed to shatter the despair among the children. Pairs of fearful, bewildered, or sad eyes all turned to Zaire. Moments later, Zaire, with his face painted in black and green camouflage, suddenly broke into a radiant smile. You're all saved. Don't be afraid. Uncle Red Bandana is here to rescue you. At that moment, a child clutching half a stone cautiously asked, Hello, are we saved? Zaire turned toward the voice, noticing a pretty little girl with sparkling eyes. Zaire took a deep breath, suppressing the anger rising within him again. He smiled and nodded, saying, Yes, you are free. The bad guys outside were taken care of by Uncle Red Bandana. If you're not afraid, come out and see. The bad guys who bullied you have even lost their heads. Perhaps Zaire's words brought some comfort. Or perhaps the children finally grasped the situation. Either way, the group of children, like wind-up toys, scrambled up with all their might. In an instant, Zaire found himself surrounded by a swarm of little imps no taller than a few feet. Their excited chatter filled the air, as their tiny, dirty hands tugged at Zaire's clothes and pants. At that moment, even the usually composed Zaire couldn't help but feel a headache coming on. This wouldn't do. He still needed to clean up the murder scene and minimize any traces left behind. But what should he do with the children? Bake them and gain their protein? Clap, clap, clap. Zaire clapped his hands sharply, attracting the attention of all the children. Squinting, he asked in a vivid tone, Kids, do you miss your parents? Do you want to go home? Yes. No. What does miss mean? 11 little heads tilted up, with eyes sparkling on their dirty faces. The children seemed to forget about the game of circling Zaire. Zaire raised an eyebrow and nodded in satisfaction. You are all good kids, so the red scarf uncle came to rescue you. Right now, the nice police officers are on their way, and they have lots of chocolate cake in their cars. But only the best behaved kids get to eat the chocolate cake. Are you good kids? Instantly, the children's eyes filled with longing, and they nodded vigorously, babbling their agreement. Zaire pointed to the warehouse door, maintaining his smile. I have some things to do, so everyone go to the door and wait for me. Okay? Remember, don't leave or there won't be any chocolate cake. Understand. Understand. Chocolate. Chocolate. The children responded in unison, their faces brimming with joy at the thought of sweets. Before Zaire could say more, the children took each other's hands and formed a line, walking towards the warehouse door in small, eager steps. Phew! Zaire watched their jubilant departure and couldn't help but breathe a sigh of relief. Handling children was harder than dealing with gang members. Zaire quickly turned and ran to the spot where the fight had just occurred. Swoosh! With a blank expression, Zaire pulled out the long, black military knife, shook off the blood, and then removed all the iron nails from the bodies and heads, stuffing them into his pockets. These homemade blow darts were essential for killing silently. One of the bodies had been strangled, so there was nothing to clean up there. Zaire thought for a moment and, satisfied there were no loose ends, walked over to a nearby table. Under the bright light, stacks of cash lay invitingly. Without hesitation, he grabbed a black duffel bag from the table and began packing the money. Consider it the gang's reimbursement for his travel expenses. After all, biking to Brooklyn had been exhausting. A few minutes later, Zaire, with a duffel bag full of cash, pulled out Sergei's phone. He searched online for several numbers and began making calls. Hello, this is the New York Times. There are kidnapped children in sportswear gang's Brooklyn warehouse number 10. Zaire deliberately lowered his voice to sound hoarse and gravelly. After receiving confirmation, he hung up and made similar anonymous calls to the Herald and the New York Post, among other media outlets. His last call was to the police. Zaire then picked up the heavy duffel bag and headed out. His intricate plan was necessary because he didn't trust the NYPD, which likely had corrupt officers colluding with criminals. By involving the media, he ensured public scrutiny would protect the children from gang retaliation. Clank. Zaire opened the warehouse door to the children's excited cheers. Maybe most of their enthusiasm was for the promised chocolate cake, but as he saw their pure smiles and sincere eyes, his worries melted away. At 4 a.m. in Brooklyn, the sky was overcast, promising a heavy rainstorm. From a shadowy thicket 500 meters from Warehouse 10, Zaire watched as police cars with flashing lights sped towards the warehouse, feeling relieved. He looked down at a stone in his palm and smiled. It was the children's reward for him, worthless, yet priceless. With a final glance at the warehouse, Zaire vanished into the darkness. Now, it had nothing to do with him. The red scarf was retired. Citizen Zaire was back. Passing Brooklyn Bridge, Zaire discarded his knife and stone. Everything else went into the fast-flowing East River. The combat boots, the scarf, the bloody nails, the metal pipe, and the 2 borrowed phones. Ideally, his clothes would have been discarded too, but unprepared and not wanting to bike home naked, Zaire decided to deal with them later. As rain began to fall, Zaire sped home, carrying his duffel bag. When he carefully opened his apartment door and stepped inside, the rain poured down, hammering against the windows. Phew! Completely exhausted, Zaire finally relaxed. His aunt's bedroom door was closed, indicating she was still asleep. Zaire tiptoed across the dim living room, hiding the duffel bag in his room. Then he undressed and headed to the bathroom. After a few minutes under the hot water, Zaire, drowsy but determined, soaked his clothes in disinfectant to erase any blood traces. Finally, Zaire collapsed into bed, and within seconds, soft snores echoed through the room, blending with the rain's rhythm. Reset. When Zaire awoke again, the familiar sound of the simulator rang in his ears. It was still raining heavily outside, washing away the city's grime. He checked his phone, 11:10 a.m. Though he'd only slept for 6 hours, he was too restless to fall back asleep. Zaire abruptly opened his eyes and activated the simulator. Simulation starting. Current identity. Katakan new recruit. Do you want to descend with this identity? Rejecting will assign a random descent. Squinting, Zaire pondered and chose to reject. He needed powerful firearms or other significant advantages, like the 21 enhancements of the Astartes. With the simulator's new resource feature, Zaire needed to become stronger quickly to create a positive feedback loop. Attacking crime organizations was more suitable than robbing military warehouses. You have descended into the Warhammer universe. Time: 4:33 Location: Storm Sector, Krieg Planet. You set foot on the planet's surface. Before you can observe your surroundings, lethal radiation penetrates every cell in your body. You feel dizzy and have trouble breathing. You are close to death. Your vision becomes blurry, and you see a short figure wearing a strange breathing mask and a brown military waterproof coat. You feel breathless and try to call for help. A spade hits your head, causing blood to flow. You are on the brink of death once again and fall into unconsciousness. You remain unconscious as you are dragged into an underground tunnel. You've been captured. You miraculously survive. On the first day, you gradually awaken from your coma. Before you can understand your surroundings, a middle-aged man dressed as an officer appears before you. He introduces himself as Colonel Yurton, commander of the 83rd Krieg Regiment. He explains that you, with an unknown identity and mysterious background, appeared on Krieg's death field and were captured by a loyal Krieg soldier. You demonstrate your loyalty to the Emperor and try to explain that everything was arranged by the Emperor. Colonel Yurton believes you. You suddenly realize that during your coma, your injuries have completely healed. You propose to Colonel Yurton that you want to learn more combat skills and survival knowledge. He immediately agrees without hesitation. You hear Colonel Yurton's explanation that nuclear fire has destroyed the planet's surface. The insurrection that swept the planet has been temporarily crushed, but remnants of the rebels still resist fiercely, causing heavy losses among the loyalists. Your joining the Krieg Corps is an honor. To fight for the Emperor, the Krieg Corps will pay any price, says Colonel Yurton. Confidently, you follow Colonel Yurton out of the detention area. You do not notice the fanaticism and astonishment in Colonel Yurton's eyes. On the second day, in an underground tunnel on the front lines, a Krieg watchman wearing a breathing mask, steel helmet, and a black-green waterproof coat becomes your superior. You try to communicate with him, but he remains silent, leading you to the equipment storage area and motioning for you to choose freely. You notice almost all the equipment is covered in dried blood, but you quickly put on the Krieg soldier's standard gear: steel helmet, breathing mask, military boots, and a black waterproof coat. You carry additional wooden handle grenades and pick up a Lucius 98 pattern laser gun, which you are very fond of. Your superior hands you a heavy serrated bayonet. You try to ask for a long-handled weapon like a spade, but he remains silent. Fully armed, you follow the watchman into battle against the rebels. The underground firefight is intense and bloody. You stay alert, continuously learning the watchman's combat techniques. You are ambushed, and a lone rebel charges at you. Your laser gun quickly runs out of ammo, turning the rebel into minced meat. You breathe heavily, still shaken. The watchman observes everything. After the brief battle, he or she explains that while the Lucius 98 pattern laser gun is powerful, its battery capacity is low, requiring careful ammo management to maintain combat effectiveness. You realize that the watchman isn't unwilling to talk, but is wary of engaging with a mysterious stranger. Killing the rebel proved your loyalty. Now you are comrades. On the third day, you use the heavy serrated bayonet to slit the throats of 2 rebels in combat. Your impressive performance catches the watchman's attention, and he briefly asks for tips on using knives. On the 4th day, under the watchman's lead, you join his infantry squad. The 10-member team faces arduous tasks as the rebels madly attack the loyalists' underground hive city. Your mission is to halt the enemy's advance and attempt to counterattack. You seem to adapt to the combat style in the underground tunnels, using shadows and numerous wooden handle grenades to successfully kill a few rebels. During a lull in the battle, you receive a specially found reward from the watchman: a perfectly fitting spade. In the first week, the underground battles become increasingly brutal. The rebels' assaults are relentless, and your squad loses 3 soldiers. Despite repeatedly asking their names, you never learned them. In the second week, the stench of burnt flesh and laser collisions fills the underground tunnels. You become silent as the rebels use heavy weapons like laser cannons, causing significant losses despite being killed by the recoil. A Krieg soldier who fought alongside you is blown to bits, leaving no trace. Enraged, you pick up a heavy inferno gun and charge into the rebel-occupied tunnels, killing many rebels and completing the infantry squad's mission, but you feel only sadness. In the third week, Colonel Yurton hears of your bravery and suggests you join his guard unit for elite combat training and command lessons. You refuse and, despite Colonel Yurton's strong opposition, accept the watchman's recommendation to become a Krieg Grenadier. Overwhelmed with grief, you enter a strange state, both mad and calm. You seem to long for death, but with an inexpressible loyalty, you unleash the Emperor's endless wrath on the advancing rebels. This time, you reclaim the rebel-occupied tunnels at the cost of only a few fingers. Your outstanding performance seems to attract the attention of the rebel commander, making your future battles increasingly challenging. In the fourth week, Colonel Yurton personally orders your infantry squad to hold the occupied tunnels with no retreat orders, unless you choose to join his Krieg Guard. You try to convince the watchman to disobey orders and leave you to defend alone, but he does not respond, silently leading the remaining 2 Krieg soldiers to set up dual heavy saw guns and carry more wooden-handled grenades. You fall silent, strapping on the heavy Inferno gun and spade, taking a Lucius 98 pattern laser gun, and setting traps and mines in the tunnels. The battle for you and the infantry squad begins. The roar of the dual heavy saw guns is deafening, and the laser gun flashes light up the dark tunnels like daylight. However, countless rebels surge like waves. As soon as one wave is defeated, another rushes in. 2 Krieg soldiers fall beside you, their unnamed fingers never releasing the laser gun triggers until the batteries are completely drained. As the situation becomes critical, you detonate the mines, the intense blast flinging rebel flesh against your waterproof coat. You notice the watchman, now half a body, continues to pull the trigger of the saw gun until it suddenly stops roaring. The rebels prepare another assault, and tears of blood seem to flow from your eyes behind the breathing mask. Silently, you strap on the Inferno gun's battery and tie wooden-handled grenades all over your body. You retreat a short distance, lying in the shadows, waiting. In a daze, you recall the watchman's occasional muttered prayers. Breathing is war, death is peace. Survival is shame, death is redemption. You mutter, as more rebels flood into the tunnels. You pull the pins on most of the grenades and leap from the shadows. In an instant, your roar echoes through the tunnels. For Krieg charge, the flames and shrapnel from the wooden-handled grenade ignited the battery pack of the Inferno gun. A violent martyrdom explosion occurred, completely collapsing the underground tunnel. You were blown to pieces and buried under thousands of tons of soil and rocks. You are dead. Simulation ended. Duration, 30 days. Options to retain from this simulation. 1. Krieg Legionnaire Soldier Suit, brand new. 2. A bundle of wooden-handle shrapnel grenades, 12 pieces. 3. Krieg Grenadier Combat Experience, 1 month. Simulation time exceeded 24 hours. Simulator wear and tear not exempt. Cooling time, 30 hours. Currently available cooling time, 6 days and 5 hours, 149 hours. Consume cooling time. Cooling time not consumed. Simulator enters natural cooldown. Cooldown can be waived at any time. At this moment, lying on the bed, Zaire couldn't help but feel his blood boiling, even though it was just a brief life simulated by the simulator. He was still shocked by his series of choices. Loyalty. What incredible loyalty. Zaire glanced at the completed simulation rewards. The smile on his lips grew brighter, although he still didn't have the Imperial firearms he desired. A month of Krieg Grenadier combat experience was not bad at all. This wasn't just simple training. It was combat experience honed day after day between life and death, ignoring the other 2 rewards. Zaire swiftly chose the third option. In an instant, the muscle tissue throughout Zaire's body seemed to absorb vast amounts of nutrition and exercise, expanding once again by a significant margin. Not only that, even his skeletal structure underwent a miraculous change. His entire body continued to grow in size. His height had even increased from 1.75 meters to 1.80 meters. The 2-meter-long bed was almost too small for Zaire now. At the same time, countless combat skills honed through life and death training as a Krieg grenadier, continuously flooded into Zaire's mind, and quickly transformed from memory into deeply ingrained instincts within his body. The indomitable spirit of a veteran soldier who had faced death without fear burst forth from Zaire's eyes. Soon after, this spirit swiftly dissipated and merged into a deeper place. Phew! Zaire abruptly sat up from the bed, lowering his head to observe. At this moment, his muscles were full and glowing, his skin radiant. With a slight effort, the strength at his command was even greater than before. Zaire even felt that he was now more than twice as powerful as he had been just minutes ago. Aha! Excited, Zaire pushed himself up with one hand, easily jumping off the bed to the ground. He swung his fist forcefully, demonstrating powerful movements. However, Zaire's excitement didn't last long. Real-world problems that kept surfacing began to weigh on him. Zaire, wearing only his underwear, searched through the entire bedroom and managed to gather a few sets of barely fitting clothes. He needed to replace all his clothes. As Zaire struggled into loose, oversized sportswear, he kept pondering. Problems solvable with money were naturally simple, but there were some issues that money couldn't solve, like how he would explain the extreme changes in his body to his aunt, whom he lived with day in and day out. Sitting on the edge of the bed, lost in thought, Zaire suddenly brightened. Maybe it could work. Neurons in his brain collided and sparked, formulating an unplanned plan. Bending down, Zaire pulled out a black suitcase from under the bed. Unzipping it revealed stacks of colorful banknotes. Apartment living room. Aunt, with a troubled expression, sat on the sofa, her legs crossed. In just one night, her slightly round chin seemed sharper, appearing leaner. Having handled ingredients for so long, her rough fingertips moved back and forth on the calculator, repeatedly calculating the losses the restaurant had suffered and the additional expenses needed for reopening and renovation. Though the restaurant's monthly income had always been good, the profits were considerable. But, after deducting all expenses and high taxes, if the restaurant wanted to reopen and operate again, Aunt would have to dip into the family's savings. These savings were not just her future pension, but also her responsibility to provide for Zaire's university education, and even the sole dependence for Zaire to marry and have children in the future. Moreover, Zaire's parents had died too young. Originally an ordinary person, they hadn't left behind any inheritance. If she, as Zaire's sole guardian, didn't consider Zaire's future, then who could help the obedient and sensible Zaire? Thinking about this, Aunt's tightly knitted brows gradually relaxed. She let out a long sigh and murmured to herself, "Zaire, your whole life has been one of hard work." Decisive in her actions, Aunt made her final decision. First, she would use her own pension to cover the funding gap, not touching a single cent of what was set aside for Zaire. Squeak. Just then, the bedroom door in Zaire's apartment made a soft sound, slowly opening. Aunt looked up, following the sound, only to see Zaire, now noticeably taller and stronger than the day before, walking out with a stern expression. If this wasn't enough to shock Aunt, then, atop Zaire's thick arm, he was actually holding a large pile of colorful banknotes. Aunt, always sensitive to amounts of money, almost blinked as she quickly estimated the approximate amount of money in the stack. It was definitely not less than 300,000, even for Aunt, who was the restaurant owner. That was still a substantial sum of money. In an instant, Aunt's heart raced wildly, her breathing even becoming anxious. Zaire! She widened her eyes, her slightly round chin trembling, her panicked face shouting, "Where did you get so much money? Did you do something illegal? Zaire, are you trying to drive me to an early grave?" Aunt had never been so frantic, so disoriented. Zaire was her only relative. He was the child she had watched grow up, the treasure in her hands. And to some extent, he was her son. But at this moment, Zaire, with his stern demeanor, remained silent. He simply walked up to Ant. Bending down, he placed a stack of banknotes on the table, covering the open bills and notes. Zaire looked at Ant, tears streaming down her face, trembling all over. After taking a deep breath, he spoke slowly, word by word. Ant, have you ever heard of Captain America? For a moment, Ant was stunned. She looked puzzled, as if she had even forgotten to cry. Ah? Explosive news about billionaire Stark and Stark Industries, finally pushed off the front page by even more sensational reports, temporarily quieted down. An explosive news story about 11 children kidnapped by New York gangs swept the nation through newspapers, media, TV, and the internet, shocked countless bystanders. The daily old news of murder, robbery, drug trafficking, and gang fights, no longer enough to stir the numb nerves of most lower-class people. But children are one of their few bottom lines. After all, children are the future and hope of countless people. For a moment, phones at the New York Police Department and district offices were overwhelmed by angry citizens. Even after a morning of fermenting, even the central nervous system of the entire country, the White House, had to come out quickly and hold a press conference, attempting to appease the masses of lower-class people marching in the streets and protesting. 1 o'clock in the afternoon, countless men, women, and children are shouting protest slogans, braving the dwindling rain. Like wandering, mindless zombies, they completely surrounded the police headquarters on Parklow Street. Angry and swift-moving protesters. Even the city hall across the street was not spared. In one fell swoop, it was all surrounded. No one allowed in and no one allowed out. Meanwhile, inside the police headquarters, in the chief's office, the flustered white mayor with tousled brown hair was livid, gesticulating furiously. His angry roars echoed so loudly that even the police officers passing by in the corridor could hear. I disregard strong objections from other departments, allocating such a large budget to you every year. And you, as the police chief, is this how you repay my kindness? John, 80 billion. Your police department gets 80 billion every year. And it increases every year. Once impeccably dressed, the New York City mayor now flushed red. Like a redneck from rural Kansas, spit flew from the corners of his mouth. Listen to me. It was the White House. Even the White House called me. The president asked me what the hell is happening in New York. I don't even know. I freaking don't know anything. It was the president who personally told me that the gangs in New York have grown so bold as to kidnap children everywhere. John, what the hell have you been doing these years? What accomplishments have you made as the chief of the New York Police Department? Sleepwalking at work. Most importantly, my re-election as mayor next year is completely ruined. Ruined. Do you understand? At this moment, the furious New York City mayor, with wide-open eyes, trembled all over. His anger, like the tides of the Hudson River, is inexhaustible. Almost wave after wave surged towards the gloomy-faced black chief. The speechless black chief could only stand alone behind his desk, enduring the furious berating. Ah,
Exhausted me.
finally, as if exhausted, the New York City mayor stopped roaring. He reached out and adjusted his expensive luxury tie. Staring with bloodshot eyes, he coldly said, Now, I'm ready to hear your explanation, but John, keep it brief. There's a large crowd outside waiting for me to come out and appease them. The expressionless black chief remained silent for a moment, then suddenly spoke. I have no excuses. Such heinous child kidnappings in New York are undoubtedly the primary responsibility of the New York police and me as the police chief and cannot be shirked. However, I must reiterate some points. The expansion of gangs and the rising crime rate are not problems that can be solved simply by the police working harder. It could be an economic issue, perhaps even a cultural or institutional issue worth discussing by the White House. The black chief changed the subject. But this is not a simple multiple-choice question of catching thieves for the police. John, you, the New York City mayor, suddenly red-faced, involuntarily cursed. However, afterward, the tousled-haired New York City mayor, as if restoring his arrogant strategist mentality, he turned around without a word, leaving the office directly. At the same time, the expressionless black chief suddenly reached out and tapped the desktop. Slowly sat back into his temporarily owned chair. He fell into silence. As the chief of the New York Police Department, Black John knew many things, even more than the New York City mayor knew. He knew why humans kill and rob. He also understood why humans murder and traffic drugs. He even inadvertently discovered that the kidnapping of children by New York gangs was never a national shocking headline. Kidnapping children is just a mature, stable industry chain belonging to criminals. Even if it's just one link, the profits it can gain are considerable. Police John tried to solve similar problems from a legal perspective. But until Police John became the police chief, the entire industry chain has never disappeared but instead flourished. Every year, there are hundreds of missing children in New York City alone. If counted across the country and even across the entire Americas, it is simply an astronomical figure. At this point, the black chief suddenly closed his eyes in pain. He was powerless against this.
Dong dong dong.
At this moment, a knock on the door interrupted the black chief's desolate mood. He took a deep breath and said, "Come in." A moment later, a middle-aged police officer hurriedly entered. Under his arm was a thick stack of folders and reports. "Chief, the basic information on murder cases and child abduction cases has been preliminarily completed." The middle-aged police officer approached and spread the folders and reports in front of the black chief. "How are the children?" The black chief looked at the report and asked casually. Their condition is not bad. They are all unharmed and should be eating chocolate cake right now." The middle-aged police officer smiled reluctantly and said, "However, because the children need to provide testimony to help solidify evidence for both the murder and abduction cases, the FBI has prohibited their parents from taking them away. You go tell the FBI people to get the hell out of here." The black chief frowned and glanced down at the report. As long as there's no order from above, the investigation rights for a few cases belong solely to the New York Police Department. Before the words fell, the black chief suddenly threw down the heavy folders and reports, raised his head, and asked, "Uncle Red Hood? Green-faced man? Chocolate cake guy? Is this the testimony provided by the children? Their ages? Appearance? Ethnicity? You've been busy for half a day, and you haven't even investigated these basic details." "We investigated, and the report details it." The middle-aged police officer quickly bent down, flipped through the report, and pointed to one page to explain. "Through brief exchanges with the children by psychological experts, as well as on-site inspections by investigators, we have compiled several characteristics that fit the image of the suspects. Ages from 20 to 40, white or yellow race, military training background, mercenaries or retired soldiers, skilled in cold weapon combat, and extremely strong counter-reconnaissance awareness. There were hardly any useful clues left at the scene. Hiss. Frank Castle. The black chief suddenly widened his eyes and took a cold breath. "He's back." Maybe not him." The middle-aged police officer smiled bitterly. According to information disclosed by the FBI, Frank has been active on the border recently, engaging in skirmishes with many Mexican gangs. It's said that the local situation is quite dire. Then, the short-horned devil from Hell's Kitchen? The black chief raised another guess but then shook his head to dismiss it. The short-horned devil usually only operates in Hell's Kitchen with less brutal methods and, most importantly, does not kill. In an instant, the black chief and the middle-aged police officer exchanged a meaningful glance. But in each other's eyes, there was shock. Perhaps a new villain has emerged in our New York. In general, the birth of a lie requires more lies to cover it up. However, Zaire's lie integrated the true history of this world, the imminent future and various possibilities. He simply revealed some things that had not yet happened in advance to increase credibility. Moreover, compared to Zaire, who kills like killing chickens, his aunt, as an ordinary person, finds it easier to accept a familiar and noble World War II hero who rises from the coffin to save the world. And Zaire is just a minor character in the story, driven by hot-blooded enthusiasm. Of course, Zaire doesn't expect his aunt to believe everything, as long as his aunt is no longer surprised by things beyond common sense, such as his rapidly changing physique in the near future, such as more unexplained money or equipment, and so on. Even if his aunt is half skeptical, she will not report Zaire but choose to shelter and protect him. And when Stark publicly reveals the identities of superheroes, ushering in an era of chaos where antiheroes abound, Zaire believes his aunt will gradually get used to it. Having explained everything, Zaire, who was lounging on the couch, made lunch for his aunt, who was doubting life. Then he began to busy himself with other things. The reinforcement work in the basement has been completed, and the borrowed tools need to be returned. The restaurant's renovation and preparation work also requires Zaire's attention. After all, his aunt's business is also a career, more like spiritual sustenance. Even though Zaire still has a lot of money left, he dare not use it for the time being. He's afraid of causing too much stimulation, which his aunt can't handle, leading to a stroke. Before leaving, the filial Zaire turned his head to look at his aunt. He found his aunt stuffing lunch into her mouth fiercely, counting money with one hand, occasionally muttering unclear words and laughing lightly. This seems to be progressing smoothly, right? Zaire breathed a sigh of relief. Immediately after, he carefully greeted his aunt, only to receive a disdainful glance from her. Zaire smiled and walked out of the door. This is the meaning of family and the source of Zaire's fighting spirit. Zaire first went to the basement of the apartment, packed up all the tools and equipment, and easily carried them back to the second floor of the apartment. Mr. Herman Schultz was kind enough to lend Zaire tools as a neighbor. But recently, he's been unemployed and can only stay at home. Zaire knocked on the door and expressed his gratitude to Mr. Schultz, who looked haggard from unemployment. Then he proposed to hire him to redecorate a restaurant. Mr. Schultz, with calloused hands and a large build, was suddenly excited, with a hint of shine even on his dark-skinned face. Just a simple job instantly rejuvenated him. Zaire began to discuss the schedule and price with him, and Zaire refused Mr. Schultz's deliberately lowered wages. Instead, he offered a slightly higher price than the market rate as a gesture of gratitude for lending him tools. Mr. Schultz was very grateful for this. They agreed to meet the next morning to discuss further. Zaire left the apartment. The sky over New York was still overcast. However, the rain gradually dwindled, leaving only a fine drizzle, persistently falling. Yet on the streets, individuals and groups of people were excited, their spirits high. Even some uninformed passers-by quickly got news and learned of the situation, joining the procession with immense indignation, chanting slogans to protect children. Obviously, the public opinion storm initiated by Zaire had just begun the first half, and there were signs of intensifying. As if unaware of all this, Zaire, like an ordinary citizen, walked against the crowd, heading towards a nearby supermarket. Perhaps because of Zaire's robust physique, or perhaps because of the vigorous aura he exuded. In any case, Zaire moved forward. The surrounding crowd subconsciously made way for him, as if afraid to touch Zaire at all. Zaire didn't pay much attention, just slightly lowered his head, pulled up the hood of his tracksuit, and quickened his pace. Zaire never cared much about his attire, since his aunt had always taken him shopping in the past. So when faced with a dazzling array of clothing styles, Zaire was at a loss. Thus, he could only choose some sturdy and durable clothes and pants, telling the salesperson to bring 10 pieces of each style. Zaire quickly settled on his clothes, then bought 5 pairs of sturdy military boots. This way, whether for daily life or for more intense activities like combat and assassination, he would be well prepared. Zaire carried a heavy load of bags and checked out cleanly and efficiently. However, before Zaire could step out of the store, 2 sweaty, clearly out-of-shape Caucasian policemen suddenly blocked Zaire's path. Simultaneously, a freckled young policeman cautiously rested his hand on his holster, his eyes vigilant, saying, "Sir, please temporarily halt any actions and show your ID or driver's license." Zaire frowned slightly. A glint of coldness flashed in his eyes. Fleeting, he slowly revealed a smile. Very friendly, he asked, "Hello, officer. What seems to be the problem?" "It's nothing serious. Just a report of seeing gang members in sportswear." Another middle-aged policeman scanned Zaire and visibly relaxed a lot. He smiled and said, "But obviously the informant got it wrong. You're definitely not Slavic." Before he finished, Zaire still smiled and relaxed all the tense muscles in his body. It was just a spontaneous inspection, and there was no need for a big fuss. His thoughts turning, Zaire shook his head slightly, pretending to complain. "Damn it, I'm just out enjoying some shopping." The middle-aged policeman shrugged helplessly and said, "Sorry, sir. Please show your ID, and then you can go." Zaire put down the things in his hands. He took out his ID, which he carried with him. The middle-aged policeman took it and glanced at it before returning it to Zaire. He apologized again, full of regret. "Sorry for disturbing your journey." Zaire nodded, picked up the items he bought, and left the store. When Zaire's figure disappeared into the crowd, the middle-aged policeman, expressionless, walked over to the young policeman who looked frustrated and said in a low voice, "Age mismatch." The report said the suspect was between 20 and 40 years old, but the young man we just stopped is only 18. He's just well developed. Shouldn't we be catching criminals from the gang? What's with the search for suspects in the homicide? Didn't you read the report? That suspect is a hero who saved a child. The young policeman's face was full of indignation, suppressing his anger and muttering, "You're too naive. If killing the suspect from the sports gang makes him a hero, what are we as police officers?" The middle-aged policeman sneered, expressionless. Then he suddenly said to the young policeman, "Forget it, you go rest in the car. I'll look around and then go back." Seeing the young policeman leaving the mall with a disgruntled face, the expressionless middle-aged policeman quickly took out his phone and started recording something. On the open interface of the phone, more than a dozen names were densely recorded. Identity card numbers and home addresses. These were the lists of suspected persons he had stopped and checked before. And Zaire's information was also recorded by the middle-aged policeman. After everything was done, the middle-aged policeman hesitated for a moment and chose to send it out. "Damn it, I need at least 3 times the hush money this month. Otherwise, with the current situation, the risk of doing things for them is too high." The middle-aged policeman muttered to himself. With his purchased clothes in hand, Zaire walked home. The police questioning was unexpected, though not beyond his expectations. His cover remained clean. The loose ends from his previous business were also neatly tied up. Zaire wasn't afraid of the police investigation at all. Thus, he dismissed the whole matter from his mind. However, the recent pressure from the New York police was immense. They were definitely sweeping through gang territories. Zaire planned to harvest the gang's warehouse. The plan to replenish simulator resources might need to be postponed, at least until the media storm on the surface subsided. Luckily, the cooldown time for the simulator wasn't long recently. Zaire didn't need to waste precious time and resources converting. Upon returning home, Zaire found that his aunt had already put away all the cash. As he set down the clothes, his aunt mentioned hiring Mr. Schultz for renovations. His aunt highly approved of this. She even verbally praised Zaire's actions. What surprised him even more was that his aunt, seemingly accepting the world's setting, began to subtly inquire. She asked if Zaire would undertake certain dangerous tasks or participate in operations. Zaire instantly had a headache. He could only use his low-profile identity to barely get through. Calculating the time, Captain America should have awakened and be adapting to modern life. If not for fear of attracting the attention of S.H.I.E.L.D., causing unnecessary trouble, Zaire would like to meet Captain America. After all, the world of a World War II soldier is much simpler than that of a billionaire. Early the next morning, the overcast sky over New York dissipated, and sunlight shone brightly. The hurried Zaire found Mr. Schultz, who was preparing for work. Just as they were about to leave the apartment, Ant, who had just finished grooming and was in high spirits, chased after them. She had changed into durable gray work clothes, even tying up her short hair, appearing neater and tidier. After a brief refreshment, Ant's dominant womanly aura gradually revived. Now, she stared at Zaire with wide eyes and a chilling tone. "Wake up, Zaire. Your weekend is over. Have you forgotten the morning classes you're supposed to attend?" Facing Ant's imposing manner, Zaire, muscular and strong, could do nothing but comply. He originally didn't want to waste time returning to high school. Occasionally going out to kill gang members and raid their warehouses wasn't enough fun. But last night, no matter how Zaire argued, he couldn't convince his old-fashioned aunt. Even in the end, when Zaire tried to use Captain America's reputation, Aunt firmly stated, "If Captain America needs an 18-year-old high school dropout to save the world, then I say the world is doomed. It's beyond saving. Even if God descends tomorrow morning, or Buddha manifests, even if aliens invade the earth, you, Zaire, still need to go to school. At least get your high school diploma. There's no negotiation on this." Zaire ultimately chose to yield, but after getting up in the morning, he planned to skip class and figure it out later. However, it seemed Ant, being more skilled, had already figured out Zaire's intentions. Facing Ant's aggressive stance, Zaire spread his hands helplessly and said, "I surrender. I'll go to class. Ant, take care and don't overwork yourself." "Humph. Brat, do you even need to say that?" A victorious Ant rolled her eyes at Zaire. Perhaps after the recent series of mental stimulations, Ant found a better way to deal with the messed-up world. Ant warmly greeted a puzzled Mr. Schultz out of the apartment and hailed a cab. Zaire shook his head and resignedly pushed his bicycle out of the apartment. But as the breeze brushed his face, Zaire suddenly thought of a way to take a leave of absence, a long one. The excuse was simple yet true. The family restaurant was robbed, and his traumatized family needed his long-term company. Between the streets, Zaire grinned as he walked amidst the chaotic traffic. Even the power under his feet seemed much stronger. Fighting with people, fighting with Ant, what a joy! An hour later, in Midtown Manhattan, New York City, after Zaire vividly and movingly described his actions, which touched and convinced the grade director and teachers, Zaire successfully obtained a privilege. With only 3 months left until summer vacation, as long as Zaire passed several makeup exams and achieved passing grades, he wouldn't need to return to school for classes. And it wouldn't delay Zaire from obtaining his high school diploma and attending the graduation ceremony. So, with a smile on his face, Zaire walked out of the school gate. He planned to go home and review high school knowledge. Now, Zaire's killing skills were simply unparalleled, worthy of being called a doctor of beheadings. But those familiar knowledge seemed to have gradually faded from him. At that moment, Zaire frowned, every muscle in his body tensing suddenly. Someone was constantly spying on him. Right now, Zaire was on a street outside Midtown High School. The students who were going to class had already entered the school. There were hardly any pedestrians on the whole street. It seemed most people had joined the protest march surrounding the New York Police Department to join in the fun. Police? Or gang? Zaire pondered. If it was the police, they wouldn't need to spy right now. They could just come up in a group and attack. If Zaire resisted fiercely, shooting wildly wouldn't be illegal either. But if it was the gang, didn't these guys like to shoot first and ask questions later? Squeak. Just as Zaire stopped, silently alert, a bread delivery van parked on the roadside suddenly started. The tires squealed against the ground, swiftly arriving in front of Zaire. Zaire was about to instinctively roll away, but he forcefully stopped his body's instinct. Clatter. The van's door abruptly opened, and a black pistol pointed at Zaire. At the same time, a male voice with a Slavic accent drifted slowly from inside the van. Mr. Zaire, the sportswear mafia would like to talk to you. We hope you'll cooperate. However, facing this deadly threat from the mafia, Zaire was silent for a moment, then slowly narrowed his eyes. On his face, he struggled to squeeze out a twisted smile, uncertain if it was fear or excitement. Please don't shoot. I'll cooperate with you. Before the words fell, Zaire actually took the initiative to step forward and sit in the vacant seat of the bread van. Seemingly, Zaire's cooperation and initiative surprised the man with the gun greatly. After a moment of daze, he took out a completely airtight black hood from his pocket, indicating Zaire to put it on himself. Then, he turned to the driver and ordered, "Drive to the usual place." The van's door closed, the engine roared, and just as Zaire put on the hood, under the pitch-black fabric, a smirk filled with bloodthirst gradually blossomed. "You asked for this. I just wanted to be an ordinary citizen. Why is it so difficult?" Zaire closed his eyes. The truck accelerated, driving straight ahead. The truck stopped, then accelerated again. Left, right. After a minute, Zaire stopped forcibly memorizing the route. Clearly, the driver was overly cautious. With each segment of the journey, they seemed to circle back repeatedly. It was as if they were evading pursuit or dodging police inspections. 20 minutes later, the box truck entered the Hell's Kitchen. It traversed several dilapidated and potholed deserted streets. Finally, it pulled into a factory with a weathered sign hanging, reading, "Feezy Auto Repair Shop." Clang. The box truck abruptly stopped. Simultaneously, the door was yanked open by someone. At the same time, by Zaire's ear, a man with a heavy Slavic accent spoke. "Mr. Zaire, please step out." At this moment, Zaire, wearing a black mask, seemed like an indifferent bystander. He slowly got up and stepped out of the truck. His movements were leisurely and relaxed. There was no panic or confusion typical of someone being kidnapped. His feet touched the ground. Zaire, whose hands were not bound, removed his black mask and squinted to survey his surroundings. It seemed to be an auto repair shop. It looked like it had been abandoned for a long time. Even the oil stains on the ground were covered with dust. Only some covered repair tools lay in the corner, and a few scrapped engines showcasing past glory. Hey! Just then, not far from Zaire, a bald white man who was chatting with his accomplice seemed to notice the hostage's movement. The bald white man's eyes instantly turned fierce, and he shouted, "What the hell? Who told you to take off your mask?" Before he finished speaking, the bald white man rushed forward, seemingly intending to give Zaire an unforgettable lesson. However, the Slavic man with a gun jumped out of the box truck. He stopped the hot-tempered bald white man. "Joseph, calm down. He's cooperating." Zaire, squinting, looked over upon hearing the voice. He noticed that the Slavic man was significantly shorter than average. Even with thick platform shoes, he was only about 5 feet tall. The Slavic man with the accent moved closer to Zaire. He stared at Zaire, who had no expression, and politely said, "Mr. Zaire, please follow me." "Wait." Zaire, with a slight frown, glanced around at the scattered figures, and disappointment filled his face. "Is this all the sports suit gang has? Just a few people? Even counting the driver who had just opened the door and got off, there were only 4 people in the workshop." Due to Zaire's words, they quickly became vigilant, and the short Slavic man lifted the gun barrel. the bald white man in front of Zaire, and behind the bald white man, a strong black man who had just picked up a machete. "Hey kid, we're not just some gang. We're professionals hired at a high price to handle problems. Understand?"
Professionals.
The bald white man smiled broadly, his tone mocking. Then he cracked his neck a few times. He stepped forward boldly, opened his strong arms and lunged toward Zaire. "Hired killers." Zaire shook his head slightly, regret written all over his face. Suddenly, he stiffened his spine. His muscles tensed suddenly, releasing an incredibly powerful force. Zaire's feet slid and stepped. In the blink of an eye, he brushed past the charging bald white man. And he took advantage of the bald white man's widened eyes and brief moment of shock, moved his feet to hide behind the opponent. Bang! At the same time, a muffled gunshot rang out, blood splattering everywhere. However, it was the bald white man, used as a human shield by Zaire, who screamed in pain. The short Slavic man who had fired seemed shocked by Zaire's swift movements. He accidentally injured his subordinate. This made him completely furious. He can dodge bullets. At the moment, Zaire couldn't withstand bullets head-on. But after 2 enhancements in the simulator, whether it was explosive power or reaction speed, it far exceeded that of ordinary people. Moreover, he didn't need to dodge bullets, just the rotating muzzle of the enemy. Everything happened in the blink of an eye. The bald man screamed, clutching his shoulder, staggering. Bang! Meanwhile, a dull gunshot suddenly echoed, blood splattering everywhere. However, it was the bald white man screaming, used by Zaire as a human shield. In an instant, the short gunman seemed stunned by Zaire's sudden ferocity. He had accidentally wounded his own man. This sent him into a frenzy. He can dodge bullets. Currently, Zaire couldn't withstand bullets head-on. But after 2 enhancements in the simulator, his explosiveness and reaction speed far exceeded normal levels. Moreover, he wasn't dodging bullets but the spinning gun barrels of his enemies. It all happened in the blink of an eye. The bald white man screamed, clutching his wounded shoulder as he staggered. Yet Zaire had already pivoted the moment the gunshot rang out, stomping firmly on the ground. Like a beast gliding low to the earth, he charged towards the short man who posed the greatest threat in the room. In the blink of an eye, Zaire was upon him. The acrid smell of tobacco in quick breaths, bloodshot eyes, and the rotating gun barrel again. Expressionless, Zaire utilized all his senses, probing every detail about his enemy. In an instant, the short man couldn't react before Zaire grabbed his wrist. Muscles bulged and tendons strained on Zaire's arm. Crack. A crisp sound echoed as the short man's wrist, holding the gun, twisted instantly, bones snapping. Then, before the pain of the fracture could register, crack. With an icy stare, Zaire kicked at the short man's knee. Ugh! Instantly, the short man's face first turned red, then pale. Simultaneously, Zaire snatched the gun from the short man's broken hand, leaving him sprawled on the ground. Then, Zaire turned swiftly, facing the muscular black man who had already charged at him. The muscular black man glared fiercely. Roar! He roared angrily. His sharp, glinting cleaver swung down towards Zaire's head. However, Zaire's free left hand caught the sharp cleaver mid-air, holding it defensively before him. Instantly, gunshots, shouts, the sound of bones snapping, and the incessant thuds of bodies hitting the ground. The driver, overwhelmed by terror, felt like he was plunging into an abyss. Boom! Seeing the muscular black man's corpse collapse with a thunderous crash, the driver, dazed, instinctively reached for his gun at his waist. However, it was too late, because a sharp cleaver was hurtling towards him. The cleaver's sharp blade shattered, but it embedded deeply between the driver's eyebrows. As the driver's rigid body fell, Zaire slowly exhaled, visibly relaxing. In less than a minute, 2 enemies dead, 2 wounded, and he had only just warmed up. Zaire took a deep breath of the blood-scented air, then calmly approached the injured man still writhing in agony. First question, how did you find me? Zaire narrowed his eyes, but all he received in response were pained moans. At that moment, the bald white man, wounded and evidently angered by Zaire's nonchalant tone, struggled on the ground, raising his head. His eyes glinted with resentment as he glared fiercely at Zaire, teeth gritted. It's you. It must be you. You're...
Bang!
Expressionless, Zaire pulled the trigger. In an instant, the bald white man's mouth exploded, teeth flying. Ugh! Blood flooded his windpipe, his eyes rolling back in suffocation. Need me to repeat the question? Zaire blinked, suddenly turning to the short man on the ground, his gaze sincere. No, no need at all. Staring at the young man who seemed like a maniacal killer, the short man, sweating profusely, despite his injuries, shook his head desperately and shouted, "A list! The tracksuit mafia gave us a list. As long as the suspects fit the police profile, we track and analyze according to the list, until we find the one who took out the boss, causing massive losses. And they offered a price we couldn't refuse. Humph. Not just in terms of money. Even the planner behind the whole thing is a genius." Zaire squinted, unable to hide his admiration. His tone, however, was mocking. Let alone the public relations storm. Kidnapping hostages everywhere under police pressure will offend so many people, both in legitimate and criminal circles. They seemed unprepared even for what to do after finding the real culprit. Even if Zaire wasn't the real culprit, wouldn't the hostages resist? These so-called professionals are far from professional, aren't they? We strictly followed the employer's instructions, sorted by age on the list, and you were the youngest of all targets. The short man seemed to sense Zaire's thoughts. Regret and unwillingness flickered in his eyes as he bitterly smiled and said, "We just wanted to practice with you, get familiar with the process, but we didn't expect such luck. Finding the target right away, right?" Unmoving, Zaire raised an eyebrow, suddenly asking, "If you don't want to die, tell me where is the current headquarters of the tracksuit mafia? I might spare your life." In Hell's Kitchen, in that abandoned treasure mall, seeing a glimmer of hope for survival, the short man's complexion improved, and he cooperated eagerly. Because both the New York police and ordinary people are causing trouble for them. To minimize gang losses, their leader gathered key members to defend against any danger. If you cooperate like this, how can I trust that everything you say is true? Zaire stared intently at the short man, his eyes flickering. And selling out clients isn't a major taboo in your line of work? It's just a failed deal. If I say you might live, I trust you won't spread this everywhere. Maybe we could be partners in some things in the future? I might even become your eyes in the underworld. Struggling to raise his upper body, the short man looked at Zaire with great sincerity, saying slowly, "Bang!" Just as the short man thought Zaire's silence indicated a change of heart. The gunshot rang out suddenly. A bloody hole appeared abruptly on the short man's forehead. He moved his lips silently, the light in his eyes fading instantly. So talkative. Zaire gave his final assessment. Then he flipped his palm. The handgun, now almost out of bullets, was completely absorbed, becoming a resource for the simulator. Current cooldown time for consumption: 6 days and 6 hours, 150 hours. Zaire glanced at the simulator. 9 hours remained until the next simulation. Decisively, Zaire consumed resources to reduce the cooldown, ending the simulator's cooldown. But instead of starting another simulation immediately, he turned to clean up the traces of the battle in the factory. After searching the driver's body again and finding another firearm. However, Zaire chose not to absorb it, but instead stuffed it into his pocket. Zaire couldn't guarantee whether the dead professionals had told the truth, but he wasn't going to wait for an opportunity either. He intended to uproot the entire tracksuit mafia, cut the grass and pull up the roots, since these guys didn't know when to quit and weren't afraid of death. Then let them become corpses. So Zaire needed weapons. A lot of weapons. Unfortunately, after searching the entire factory, he found nothing but an abandoned place. No hidden armory, nor any other useful tools for killing, except for a pile of oily mechanics tools in the corner. Now Zaire furrowed his brow slightly, immediately activating the simulator. He was ready to take his chances, hoping the Emperor's blessing would grant him an Imperial firearm. Even a common Star Realm military laser pistol would vastly outperform current firearms. Simulator booting up. Current identities available. Catachan Rookie, Krieg Grenadier. Please select an arrival identity. If refused, random arrival will be chosen. Chosen identity. Krieg Grenadier. Simulator booting up. You have arrived in the Warhammer universe. Time. Unknown. Location. Unknown. You step onto the planet's surface. You find yourself in a city engulfed in a bloody sacrifice. Before you can grab nearby weapons, a group of cultists in purple robes surrounds you tightly. You attempt to attack barehanded, but are quickly overwhelmed by more cultists pressing in. Soon unable to move even a muscle. You're trapped in an unsolvable predicament, attempting to bite your tongue in a suicidal manner. You were gradually entwined by disgusting, slimy tentacles, unable to control any part of your body, not even able to close your eyelids. You could only watch helplessly as 9 cultists lifted you high. Slowly, you were moved towards the city center, like a sacrificial offering about to be presented on a chaotic dining table. You tried to scan around desperately, only to sadly realize that there seemed to be no human presence left in the entire city to save you. The streets, now in ruins, were littered with the bodies of fallen Krieg soldiers and local defenders, burning Layman tanks and crashed Raven gunships. You even saw a Terminator power armor kneeling halfway down, overwhelmed by countless cultist corpses. Even the mighty Astartes fell. The Empire's resistance and counterattacks had failed. In despair, you began to realize that the planet before you had been completely overrun by the forces of chaos, becoming a fallen world of death. Every 9 meters you advanced, a cultist in purple robes emerged from the city's dark corners, joyously joining this grand parade with a bloody mortal carcass as an offering. They praised, they prayed, they called out. You wanted to scream, you wanted to curse, but you felt powerless. Overwhelmed with sorrow, your mental state seemed to descend into madness. Faint murmurs began to fill your ears. As the cultists advanced, even the sky gradually filled with a terrifying purple halo. The air was thick with nauseating chaos and the smell of blood, as sect priests with staves and hoods incessantly chanted prayers joined the parade. Countless mortal corpses, regardless of age or gender, were lifted and floated by tendrils of purple light. Some even included living people screaming and struggling. Your eyes bloodshot, your head spinning. You resisted the corruption of chaos fiercely, maintaining your loyalty. In a daze, you began earnestly praying to the Empress for her mercy. The grand parade reached its climax, a dazzling purple halo reflecting in the sky. Buildings in the city center covered with layers of sticky, foul-smelling mortal flesh. A massive flesh pedestal, constructed from billions of mortal flesh, stood tall in the city center. Above the pedestal, a chaotic portal hundreds of meters high nearly split open half the sky, catching your hazy gaze. Countless pink and blue horrors danced around the flesh pedestal, frolicking. They screeched, they sang, they repeated unknown incantations endlessly. Under the guard of countless chaos minions, a giant birdman with black wings and a white robe leisurely fixed both heads on you, lifted high by the cultists. Oh, poor and lucky mortal. One beak of the birdman clicked, emitting a terrifying low hum, while the other beak followed with admiration. Is he the one? You were handed over to the birdman by fanatical cultists. Eyes wild. Pink horrors clung to your back, holding your body upright, facing the more terrifying sight ahead. The birdman flapped its massive wings, head swaying, strolled to you. One head called itself Weaver of Fate Carlos, Master of Transformation, while the other head emitted a deep mocking laugh. Just hearing the restrained whispers of the birdman made your brain start to scream madly, your willpower on the verge of collapse. Tears of blood streamed from your forced open eyes, your state akin to living death, constantly praying to the Empress. Weaver of Fate Carlos seemed to see through your foolish thoughts. One head mocking that playing with magical salted meat would not come because this world is blessed by the Godhead. The other head continued to emit tempting words. Your arrival and disappearance have attracted the attention of the God of Chaos, even if you want to hide the trace of salted meat. Fortunately, you have appeared in the territory of chaos. As long as you nod your head, you will get everything you want. Strength, knowledge, wealth, and everything else that exists in the universe. If you voluntarily join the chaos, you will definitely be promoted to the Demon Prince of Chaos. No need to endure the torment of life and death. No need to worry about the hostility of salted meat. Carlos' head is skillful. Thought long ago, knowledge was thirsty. Only the holy treacherous, mother is trapped. Another head of the birdman twisted and shook, emitting a harsh admiration. As if Carlos' admiration had attracted the attention of the God of Chaos, the giant chaotic portal in your field of vision kept trembling and twisting, and the purple halo completely enveloped the planet. Countless chaos demons bowed their heads and kneeled under the flesh pedestal. Even the Weaver of Fate Carlos opened its massive wings, facing the direction of the portal, and both heads swayed slowly. The terrifying murmurs lingering in your ears became even more terrifying. Your eyeballs seemed to reach the limit, shattered and exploded. But just as you fell into darkness, through the purple halo of the chaotic portal, you seemed to see an illusory white snake wriggling in place. A necklace blue light god, with every inch of skin covered with faces of varying expressions, each face repeating the words spoken by the head of the Lord. A colorful mist, itself silent, but murmuring through the echoes between nearby buildings. A green-skinned man in ancient gray suits, floating in the air, surrounded by indescribable purple halos. Your mind seemed to be in a standstill. In your mind, there was only one unidentifiable, but deeply engraved, terrifying word echoing repeatedly. Intrigue. Accept it. Join chaos. Embrace her blessing. Become a demon prince who dominates the universe. Even more terrifying murmurs completely permeated your mind. Your spirit is about to collapse. Chaos is about to corrupt your will. You are on the brink of death. In your unconscious mind, you seem to see a flickering flame in an endless darkness. That is the flickering flame of your faltering life, the heart of loyalty. Suddenly, an illusory hand is placed near the flame, shielding it from the surrounding darkness. Desperately looking around, you discover it is a veteran Catechin who fought alongside you before, silently standing next to the flame, smiling at you. At the same time, another illusory hand is placed next to the flame, a Krieg sentinel who died in battle beside you, wearing a breathing mask, saying nothing, just giving you a thumbs up. One illusory hand after another is placed near the flame, shielding you from the darkness. You suddenly realize that the owners of these illusory hands are the dead mortals from the chaos-occupied planet, fallen Krieg soldiers and local defenders, as well as exhausted and loyal Astartes. They had no words, just silently guarding the flame while smiling at you. You were never alone in this battle. You fought for them, and for all humanity. For the Emperor.
And that concludes this episode. If you enjoyed it, I'd seriously love it if you guys could leave a like on the video, as it genuinely helps out so much, and it keeps me going. Plus, it takes only 1 second. That said, have a wonderful day. See you in the next one.